Hey again, here's your shovel. You step from a cool passage into a wall of heat, and the air hits you with an iron taste that sits on your tongue like a coin. One bell rings on the engine order telegraph somewhere beyond the bulkhead, a single clean note pointing the arrow to the next minute. Atlantic Steamship, around 1900, your black gang today. Coal trimmer turned stoker for this watch. A triple expansion engine upshaft drinks steam like it's free and expects you to pay. Why do veterans smear Vaseline in their nostrils? What happens if you crack a furnace door at the wrong moment? Who keeps the water glass from lying so sweetly it ruins a ship? This isn't a lecture. This is minute by minute firing with real tools, real rhythms. You'll feel the draft, tug your sleeves and count door open seconds the way firemen actually did. If you enjoy this kind of misery, tap subscribe, then rate the smell out of 10 and tell me where you're watching from. You report to the stokehold gratings where the air already moves like a living thing dragged through steel lungs. The chief engineer stands with his watch chain and unblinking eyes, a clipboard tucked under one elbow, white shirt going grey around the cuffs. The second owns the tempo with a chin jerk you feel more than see. The leading fireman taps a gauge glass with a nail and names your door. Port outer on number 3 for the first hour, then rotate. Trimmers ghost out of the bunker hatchways with the coal smell riding ahead of them, wheelbarrows squeaking like guilty dogs. A trimmer you know only as Jeffers cracks the scuttle lids and grins a coal-black grin. Another, small and bantam-quick, shoulders a basket and vanishes again into the black. Hand tools wait in a rack like a quiet jury. Above the gratings, the engine room telegraph's brass-faced stares. Behind it, the engine breathes a heavy, regular sentence. You nod instead of speaking because speech tumbles into work down here, and work tumbles into heat, and heat erases everything except the job and the next breath. Layout you could feel in the dark if the lamps died. Scotch marine boilers set shoulder to the shoulder across the stokehold, oval manholes bolted tight, furnace doors banded in iron, ash pits yawning like mouths waiting for teeth. Overhead the ventilator trunks sigh and boom. Cowl heads above the deck drink wind and pour it down your neck until your ears feel full. Under your boots, the steel deck broadcasts heat through the soles until your toes hold small arguments with the rest of you. Ladders bite thighs, handrails sweat, bilge plates shine with a film you do not name. You wear what everyone wears to lose. Sweat-salted flannel, wool trousers that remember heavier men, a neckerchief that catches more soot than modesty. Hobnailed boots that grip even when your knees wobble. Cotton waist is tucked at your belt beside a battered salve tin and a dented mug that knows your teeth. First century onslaught, heat like an opened oven, sulphur coal breath that sandpapers your throat, iron wet rails under your palm. Good news, your laundry does itself by boiling on you. The leading fireman lays out the kit on a steel bench battered by 100 watches. Firing shovel with a lip you'll learn to level by eye. Slice bar long enough to argue with clinker. Clinker hook with a curve like a question mark. Dart. Some call it a pricker. For tubes and stubborn bridges. You pick each up and learn waiter's language. The shovel speaks in pounds and breath. The slice bar in leverage, angles and patience. The hook in small circles and neat wrists. Coal scuttles come charged from the bunker doors. Trimmers' wheelbarrows thud the combings, then tilt and clatter and breathe dust that goes everywhere the lungs keep secrets. Reading a fire is a new alphabet. Bed thickness by feel through the soles. Colour at the bridge where flame licks brickwork. How dead corners sit dull like spoiled fruit while bright hearts pulse like they're thinking. You squint through a crack and watch the flame feather white, then fall back orange. You decide where thin throws will wake it without choking the draft. Door open discipline decides whether your eyebrows live to see the next port. Seconds counted under your breath, shoulder turned from the possible cough, face angled to meet the draft instead of swallowing it. You practice with an empty furnace first, hinge swing, foot plant, throw thin and even. Shut. Count to 5 and breathe. Open again. Throw to the wings, never heap the middle. The leading fireman watches your elbows, not your revs, because elbows tell on waste and hurry. The drawer beneath the grate waits with ash pits that will need courting, not conquest. Rattle them too hard and you stir a black weather that makes men old. Ash gear is staged already. Long rakes for the pits. A coal-stained ash hoist standing by to lift the day's black snow through its trunk. Poles clicking like teeth. buckets wet down to keep dust from taking your lungs for wages, damp sacks ready to throw over anything that breathes cinders where it shouldn't. Someone rings a handbell to set the watch. The trunk breathes a first smoky sigh and something inside you answers. The ritual owns you now, which is another way of saying you're ready. Mess reality is a tray that remembers other watches, thick tea the colour of varnish, bread gone black at the edges, where fingers can't help but be coal, duff on good days, salt meat on bad, and the rumour of vegetables like a sailor's story about mermaids. Water jugs sit warm as soup so you learn to drink before your mouth asks, tipping early and often so cramps don't find you. Sugar is fuel in lumps that crunch like gravel. Tobacco is a minute's to rest you can hold between your teeth, a trick of stillness that looks like chewing. You eat on a coal sack beside the ash pits because the only table that matters is the distance from the doors. Someone passes a mug and someone else passes a joke that lands with the weight of a shovel. Both are accepted, neither thanked out loud. You wipe your mouth with the inside of your wrist because cloth never stays clean enough. Quip for the ledger. No eggs, Benedict. Unless that's the name of the cockroach. You learn the ship by crawling inside her. A trimmer knocks the scuttle lid with his knuckles and jerks his chin, and you squeeze through into a lane of timber shores and black glitter. The bunker wakes in lantern light. Coals shining like wet beetle backs. A slow whispering slide answering every footfall. You keep one shoulder to the shoring and the other to the slope because the heap thinks in avalanches. The air turns old, a pocket where the ventilators forget to breathe, and dust tastes like pepper and pennies. Rats flicker along the periphery like opinions that won't shut up. You crouch and test the surface with the edge of your boot, then move when it holds, then stop when it murmurs. Your lantern throws a little sun that the coal immediately eats. You place the scuttle where it can't skitter away, and you start cutting the slope with the shovel's nose, making steps a man can trust for 3 minutes and not a second more. All the while, the ship speaks in thumps and the throbs through the plating, and you learn to read a list by how your spine leans. The scuttle bangs like a drumhead and the chain gets its rhythm. You squat in the throat of the hatch and pass baskets up, heel braced to a timber, hands finding rope handles before the load declares itself. Wheelbarrows complain over the combings and tip toward the gratings, iron rims knocking out a hymn only tired men know. Air sulks in here, so you sip it shallow, and often like too hot broth. A whisper turns into a hiss. The slope loosens and a black tongue of coal starts for your knees. You throw your weight sideways into the shore and shout. The nearest man jams a plank, another drags you by the belt, and the slide spends itself where your shins were. No one makes speeches. You check that your legs arrive at the same time as the rest of you, then go back to passing baskets. Work continues because that is the thing work does. By the time the bunker level comes even with your lantern, you can feel the ship's trim change, her shoulders square, her roll find a new beat. Someone will call it tidy. Down here you call it not drowning when the sea leans wrong. You come out of the bunkers with shoulders full of gravel and meet the men whose pencils decide your sweat. The chief's shirt is white where it is not, and his eyes live on gauges the way a helmsman lives on a compass. His knuckle knows exactly how to tap a needle into honesty. The second conducts by gesture. 2 fingers for pace, a flat palm for hold, a chop for more. Numbers become orders you can taste. Keep up 70 pounds where she works best. Keep the water mid-glass. Keep the bugün to bed even. Edges fed first. The telegraph rings half ahead, then full, brass arrows swinging like a priest's hand, and every fireman glances up like starlings turning. A junior signs the logbook and another writes who had which door when. You learn the unspoken rule fast. Never surprise the bridge. Steam must be waiting before they ask, waiting while they think to ask, waiting even when they forget until the last bell. If the gauge creeps, you are late. If the glass lies, you are on trial. And if the ship makes her tide, your name is not mentioned at all, which is how victory is spelled down here. Rules that stick usually arrive wearing scars. The water glass is a liar until proven otherwise, so you test it constantly. Open the top cock, open the bottom, watch the level answer like blood answering a pulse, then blow through to clear whatever dream of deception it had. Doors are mouths that bite on the wrong draft. You turn your face and shoulder before the hinge moves, count your seconds aloud in your head, and keep your stance ready to slam. Blowback teaches fast. A gust in the uptake, a careless open, and the furnace coughs hot at your eyebrows. Under the bed, clinker grows like black coral if the fire goes lazy. Slice it early and often, or the bars warp and sag like tired knees. Steam leaks talk before they show themselves. A hiss thins in a way that isn't quite air, and you go hunting with cotton waste first and the salve tin second. Every pocket carries one small repair and one small prayer. First aid, the old hands say, is 3 things: grease, grit, and a friend who saw it happen. You add a 4th, not doing the same stupid thing twice. Your first full hour at the doors settles into a drumbeat you can dance without grace. 3 furnaces in your care, a shovel that thinks in thin, even throws, and a draft that tugs at your sleeves like a thief after your pulse. You count door time so no one steals pressure while your eyes are busy. 1 and 2 and 3 shut. Step, shift the hips, open the next. Feather the wings, never heap the middle where arrogance makes smoke. Colour becomes vocabulary. White tongues at the bridge mean hunger. Duller corners sulk where the air doesn't reach. A steady orange says you guessed right. Between throws your knees, find the deck's hot spots and avoid them the way a horse avoids a snake. You check the ash pits by feel and sound. A rattle there warns that the bed is choking itself. Micro rest lives in posture. You lean a forearm on the slice bar as if measuring it. You hang a breath on a hinge. You stretch your fingers inside your glove and call it work. No one honours idleness. Everyone honours efficiency. Maintenance arrives like rain. Always in the middle of something, always on its own schedule. You slice under the bed to break thickening crust, the bar talking to your palms in stutters and grudges. The hook finds purchase with a neat turn of the wrist, and clinker comes out in dark wreaths that pretend to be rock. The grates get a measured shake, never a tantrum, because iron sags like pride if you hammer it. Ash goes where ash must, raked, wetted, so it won't learn to fly, and bucketed toward the hoist. The poles click their teeth as the cage climbs, and the trunk breathes out cinders into a world that keeps trying to be clean without your help. Soot settles in your teeth, in the hinge of your jaw, in the back of your tongue. You taste last voyage with every swallow and next voyage when you spit. Someone wipes a thumb over a front tooth and shows a grin gone grey. The joke lands because it is true. Any dentist worth his instruments would quit on sight. The bells change the air before they reach your ears. Half a head to full, 1 clean strike of brass, and backs straighten like wires tugged from the bridge. You and the man on the next door trade a nod that means speed without drama. Shovel, hinge, throw shut, your body writes the same sentence faster. The chief drifts past and taps the pressure gauge with 1 knuckle. The needle pretends it was listening all along. You feed the wings first to wake the lazy corners, then dress the heart without smothering it. Thin felted throws that land where air will use them. Hinges breathe heat against your forearms. The draft fights the shovel on the instroke and snatches the last crumbs off your blade on the out. The telegraph's pointer swings and you feel the engine's appetite sharpen under your boots. Somewhere a valve lifts its voice a note higher. You close, count, open, throw, close again, the seconds neat enough to stack like bricks. When the door seals, you listen for the bed to burn with a steady breath rather than cough. That sound tells you if the bridge will get what it asked for before it needs to ask again. Pressure isn't just a number, it's a posture you carry in shoulders and wrists, a note you measure like pitch. A man cracks a vent 3 frames away and the tone shifts by a hair. So you feather the charges, thinner, faster, until the needle steadies at the sweet place the second calls her stride. You throw wide to keep the middle from coking. Every open's counted, 1 and 2 and 3, and you close exact because waste becomes smoke and grief. The telegraph barks full ahead and you answer without words. For 30 hard minutes you chase a schedule or a tide. The engine's voice deepens until the deck hum travels through bone. Bulkheads tremble a different way that your knees recognise first. You start to measure distance by pressure and bells instead of miles. How far to the pilot, to the bar, to the next order. Simple arithmetic done in heat and habit. When the order finally eases back, you feel it in your elbows first, then in the way the pointer stops hunting. You test the gauge glass again, just because caution is a habit you'd rather keep. And you find a new blister growing exactly where the shovel socket says it belongs. Water is the quiet panic you tend every minute you call yourself alive. The glass says mid, then low, then mid again, so you do what old hands taught you. Prove it. Crack the top McCock, crack the bottom, and watch the level answer like tide on a simple shore. Blow through to clear the lie, close, confirm, and only then trust. The feed pump ticks a tune like coins being counted. The injector takes its sip with a hiss that should be gentle, never sharp. When it chatters, your stomach does too. Steam wants to carry water when the bed is angry, and priming sends wet into places meant for dry, a kind of insult that becomes damage in the engine room. The low-water drill gets told like a ghost story you never want to star in. Glass empty, plates red, brickwork talking like wood. Then an explosion that tears names off lists. You keep that story between you and the gauge, and hope it keeps you both polite. The water tender watches your hands and your face as much as the fittings. He likes men who don't trust a single sight until both cocks have had their say. Blowdown is a prayer you say with valves instead of beads. You open by habit and in order. A hand's width here, a heartbeat there, shaking silt out before it settles into sin. Too fast and the bed sulks. Too slow and the glass turns dishonest again. When the dirty water goes, a cleaner light returns through the tube, and for a minute you stand taller because clarity is rare down here. Treatment rides in the feed, lime and a tang you taste without meaning to, and someone mutters about scale the way sailors us mutter about shoals. You learn to hear carryover in the engine's breathing, a wet cough that means that the surface was whipped too hard. Most days you hold the line with patience and a feel you didn't own last watch. Foam is the other thief, a froth that steals space and sends wet steam forward. A pinch of compound goes in the feed to break the habit, and you listen for the engine to forgive you. A plate that has seen red never forgets, and neither do you, so your caution grows roots. Steam is a patient enemy. It lets you forget, then charges all the interest at once. Air isn't free, you buy it with steel and noise. Cowl heads above the deck roar when the ship shoulders into a gale. And the closed stokehold keeps the sound and hands it back as pressure behind your eyes. The forced draft fans thrum like bees in metal flowers, the trunking breathes over your skin without refreshing. You work inside that held breath, turning shallow sips into habit and pretending you're not counting them. On soot days the tubes beg for cleaning. You bank one furnace, then lance the gas passages with a steam jet until black snow flies like it's winter underground. If no lance is fitted, you work by hand, threading the pricker where flame used to be, drawing out feathery crusts that try to insulate themselves into the victory. The draft steadies, the flame sharpens, and someone says congratulations, you've invented a sauna with knives. Oxygen hunger creeps up like a pickpocket. You catch yourself, sipping air at the top of every motion, ears going hollow, until a door opens and the fans bite again. Soot blowing comes on a schedule written by experience and weather, and the only praise for doing it right is a flame that sounds content. Clean is a direction you walk toward while never arriving. You wash with a bucket and a rag that used to be a shirt, salt water dragging the grime into new maps on your skin. Oil does better. Smear a thin film on, then wipe it away and watch the soot come with it like a helpful thief. Socks boil in a tin pail perched on a friendly line valve that radiates free heat. The steam smells like last week's feet and tomorrow's too. You hang your flannel to dry in air that wets it again before your back can thank you. Boots never truly cool, they remember the deck and sing it back to your soles. On coaling day, a deck hose finds you for 30 seconds and you laugh out loud without meaning to. The water feels illegal. You become presentable. You climb below and the ship paints you the way she likes servants, black to the elbows and shining at the teeth. You learn to grease the rims of your nostrils before a watch and to rinse your eyes with a palm full of warmth after tiny mercies that add up to a man who lasts till the payday. Sleep happens to you the way steam happens to iron, by invasion, by persistence, by heat that finally convinces the body to surrender. The watch bell turns your ribs into a metronome, 4 hours on, 8 off, and your body clock rebels until it decides mutiny costs more sweat than obedience. You crawl into a bunk that never learned your name because another man rented it the previous 4 hours. The sheet preserves his shape and the salt of his labour. Hammock or hard board, both rock with the engine stride, a long wooden groan that keeps lazy time with the rods you never see. Dreams repeat the work like a cruel foreman. Doors slamming, grates singing, coal that never heaps right. Your mouth dries and floods in the same breath. You roll to the cool edge and find it already taken. Somewhere a pipe ticks hot against a bulkhead and counts down to boots. When sleep finally catches, it is brick-thick and merciless, and when the shake comes for the next watch, you surface like a diver out of black water, lungs deciding whether to shout or breathe before your brain chooses both. You learn rituals that trick the clock into kindness. Boots live with laces loose and tongues fattened, neckerchief folded where your hand will land in the dark, mug and salve tins set like small tools at the edge of reach. Wake up never changes. Tea, boots, a swear, another swear, then work. You drop the ladder steady so your knees won't remember falling, and feel heat gather around your shins like a pack of eager dogs. You pat the pack with a practiced curse and keep going. The leading fireman's stance tells you more than words ever do. Weight forward means speed, arms folded means hold, a single lifted eyebrow means do not make him say it twice. You grease the rims of your nostrils, wipe coal dust off your eyelids with a warm palmful from a friendly line, and stretch the stiffness out of shoulders the job keeps trying to borrow forever. The engine's thrum returns like a heartbeat that never left. You count it back into your bones, and the bones agree to carry you one more hour. Port means coaling, and coaling means a black weather that creeps under your eyelids and writes its name there. Lighters edge alongside low and groaning, chutes crash down and the air becomes a chewable thing that tastes like pepper and iron filings. Bags thump shoulders, baskets rattle, barrows bang like dull bells until elbows hum, and no one asks the hour because the sky has turned to darkness at noon. Women and boys in some harbours, gangs of men in others. By the second load every face wears the same mask, black to the teeth with a bright stripe where sweat carved a mouth. The ship eats with a mouth as wide as her need and keeps asking for seconds. You answer until your forearms sing. Water runs but never rinses, and a deck hose aimed briefly at your spine feels like a holiday you didn't pay for. Someone jokes about bonus pay and someone else points to the bag that split and stole it. Rumour buys lunch and reality buys a cough. You earn a coin and give a lung a talking to, then laugh because laughter shakes dust looser than coughing ever managed. A shore arrives like a rumour-granted parole. 2 hours, the second says, and the gangway feels new under your boots, the planks flexing like a muscle you forgot you owned. Street smells hit all at once as if another man's lungs borrow your chest. Fish and rope tar and rain striking stone. A bakery that makes you 10 years younger. And the clean cut of cold air you used to complain about. A pub window glows like a church for tired men. The first gulp of beer is so cold it hurts in the place your heat lives. You write a letter with a pencil that smears and tuck a pawn ticket into the same pocket. Arithmetic done between sips. Boots next trip, socks if the numbers tilt decent, a coin sent home even if the numbers don't. The clock beats you back aboard because clocks always win, but you glance up and catch a slice of sky so unreasonable a blue it feels illegal to own. You consider a second pint and choose sleep instead. The landlord inside your skull charges interest when you pretend you do not owe him. People soften the job the way oil softens soot, not by removing it, but by giving it something else to stick to. Nicknames grow from accidents, small miracles, and one very funny rat that learned to carry a duff spoon like a cutlass. Quiet favours become currency. Someone trades your worst half hour because you once did theirs when nobody watched. Another palms you a better mug after your old one's handle kissed the deck. Superstitions gather and cling, no whistling by the feed pump, no knives left pointing north on the bench. Never name the sea out loud when the glass goes touchy. Birthdays turn into an extra lump of duff and a cleaner mug, and for a minute the stokehold pretends it could be a room in a house if houses breathed like furnaces. The watch after liberty tastes like mercy mixed with debt. You climb down with a pocket of cold folded into your flannel and lose it at the second rung. Pressure steadies, your shoulders square, and you settle back into the drumbeat. Above somewhere are pilot boards, rain tapping his hat. Below, the pointer wants honesty and the water wants respect while the sea and the bridge argue about everything else. Weather lifts you by the ribs before you see it. The deck's hum broadens, the ventilators bay like hounds, and the arrow on the telegraph twitches as if it can hear the Atlantic thinking. Then the ship stands up. Roll turns your timing into arithmetic. Open on the upswing when flame leans away. Throw thin, shut just before the gust shoves in your face. The doors kick like mules if you mistime the hinge. Your palms learn to ride the pressure like reins. In the bunkers, the coal becomes a living slope whispering toward freedom. Trimmers rope off, wedge planks, move like miners inside a drum. Fans labour, draft howls, gauges grow cautious, and the bridge rings for more because weather never argues alone. You nod and answer with quicker, cleaner throws that don't smother, feeding the wings to keep the fire flat. Every bell feels 10 pounds heavier under your boots. Breath comes rationed. Sweat arrives without asking. You measure seconds by the roll, knees flexed, shoulders square. A dancer without an audience who knows every misstep burns skin. Pressure dips and claws back with each swing. You guard the needle like a gull in rough air and keep it flying. Coal shifts the way crowds do. Suddenly and all at once, a trimmer vanishes to the waist in a black wave and you're moving before your mind has the words. Ropes, hands, haul, plank shoved like a tongue into a closing throat, and he comes up coughing lumps, eyes bright in a soot face. No speeches, only breath and a curse, nobody takes personally. You throw a sack over the slide to deaden its lust for the movement, and wedge shores until the heap decides to sulk instead. Doors buck harder. You heel them shut and plant the next open like a pitman guarding his teeth. The fans wheeze at the gusts, draft snatching flame sideways with an animal noise. Pressure sags, the bridge wants more, the pointer hunts like a dog on how short lead. You feed edges fast, feathers not fists, and the bed steadies into a ragged, workable glow. After the worst of it passes, men count eyebrows with jokes because luck is a book nobody wants to open and read aloud. You taste salt that isn't the sea and feel your shirt wringing like you've been wrung by bigger hands. Night returns with a bad idea. The ship gives you one still minute, a lull that feels like kindness, and you believe it. You crack a door to catch up the starboard wing, and the gust arrives a heartbeat later, as if the Atlantic saved it with your name pinned on. Heat leaps. A hot cough kisses your face. Training speaks before fear. Turn your shoulder. Drop your chin behind your sleeve. Let the blow ride over you. The other man hits the hinge and the door takes the slap instead of your eyes. You smell singe, hair, cloth, pride, and the world narrows to a hiss that isn't air. Salve, tin, cool rag, breath counted like money. The chief's voice comes level on purpose, the kind of calm that orders panic to sit down and shut up. He looks at the bed, not you, because the bed is the thing that decides whether this becomes a story or a notice to next of kin. The second checks the dampers, lifts a glance. Draft first, door second, say it. You say it. He nods, and the watch moves as if the moment never happened, which is grace disguised as stubbornness. After comes the lesson you won't forget because your skin already wrote it down. You walk the chain of causes backward. Fan straining, weather veering, uptake pulling harder than your hinge hand remembered, your timing 1 second too hopeful. You and the other firemen run the drill with doors cold and then hot. Damper, count, weight, angle, shoulder turned, breath saved for the shut. You practice waiting for the flame to lean, not merely hoping it might. Dampers get a quarter turn more when the roll deepens. Air registers settle to even the pull across the bed. The slice bar's tip draws channels that teach the fire to breathe where you want it to. Someone mutters the old lie about singed hairs never growing back. Someone else rubs 2 fingers across your eyebrow and says you'll be uglier, but not by much. You grease the tender places and laugh because laughter controls the tremor in your hands better than willpower. Every hinge looks like a mouth with opinions. You learn to ask permission before you feed it. The needle steadies. You do too, eventually. 3 in the morning offers a truce the way a tired brawler offers a handshake. Sincere for exactly as long as it lasts. The engine's thrum goes almost kind, a slow deep pulse that your ribs borrow to keep time. Men keep small anchors in their pockets, a locket's dull shine, a postcard softened by sweat, a bit of ribbon that remembers a child's hair. You match your breath to the feedwater's quiet song and forget. For part of 1 minute that air can taste like knives. Somewhere in your head, a street appears where winter sharpens your nose hairs and your boots squeak on frozen boards. The memory feels like a drink you can't afford. You listen to the rods you cannot see and hear them promise distance. The flame talks in its private grammar, and for once it isn't asking for more. You touch the shovel socket with a thumb the way a man taps a friend's shoulder in passing. The glass shows honest mid. The pointer stays home. A bell rings somewhere far away in another ship you're not on. Down here the quiet has a weight. and it presses you into a shape you can carry for 1 more hour. You smell it before you see it, a thin hiss that isn't air, a feather of a white that catches lamplight and writes on the heat. A flange along the starboard feed line begins to weep, vapour scribbling warnings too small for the careless. Nobody shouts. Everyone moves like a language you know. The second's hand sketches the order. Ease the feed, steady the pressure, clear the footing. You snag cotton waste from your belt and let prudence decide the reach, feeling for the wet that burns before it wets. Lagging comes off in damp grey strips, twine flicked free with a pocket knife whose edge remembers better days. The chief stands where he can see your hands and the gauge in the same glance. You close the nearest door to quiet the draft's breath, then set a board under your knee so steel won't steal skin. The leak feathers, then pencils thin. You breathe through your teeth, count to 5 and nod. The man beside you passes the clamp and dog, iron heavy in a helpful way. Steam is gentle until it isn't. You say that like a grace under your breath and reach in for the first bite. The clamp bites with a grunt you feel more than hear. You set the saddle and walk the spanner in short steps because long ones tempt folly. Threads catch, slack disappears, and the weep turns from feather to dew. Someone shields your wrist with a scrap of board so the white breath can't choose new skin. The other fireman keeps the draft even, doors tended like children who might wander if you look away. A trimmer crouches with the lagging like a nurse fussing pillows where heat forgets to care. You snug the dog again, quarter turn, patience instead of pride, until metal stops arguing. The gland quits feathering and starts merely sweating, acceptable as a man after a run. You lay the lagging back, binding twine with a knot your fingers can untie in anger later. The second tests with the back of his hand from a distance that says he has learned his lessons. No heroics, only skill. A little less feed, a little more patience, the needle right where the chief's knuckle expects to find it. The engine answers in relief you feel through your arches. The rod's chant loses its fretful edge. The feedwater sings a calmer note, and even the fans sound less like argument. Work shrinks back to its ordinary size. Tools get wiped and stowed, and the vlog takes a line because small victories want paper. You rinse your hands in a bucket that turns grey between wrists and never minds. The chief checks the clamp with 2 fingers and no ceremony. The second marks the hour and drifts onto the next thing that thinks it's important. You bed the lagging smooth so it won't print its seam on the skin of anyone careless. There's a sweetness when machinery stops needing attention and goes back to merely insisting on it. You catch yourself standing easier, the shovel lighter in the fist. The telegraph stays shy of drama for a full 5 minutes, which counts as peace down here. Somewhere above, a deckhand laughs, the sound filtered into tin by plates and heat. Proof the world contains a place where air doesn't fight every mouthful. When quiet returns, it feels earned, not granted. You rest the slice bar against the bench and let your shoulder find it, like leaning on your own closed gate. The other fireman produces a bent coin with a hole and makes it vanish for the 100th time, a joke that works because ritual is a kind of shield. You drink water warm as a warning and taste less iron than before. Overhead, ventilators purr, trunks breathe without wheeze. Men speak of nothing dangerous because nothing dangerous is safe to name before pay. Someone mentions a letter that needs posting. Someone else wonders aloud if the baker still saves ends for men in boiler smell. You grease the tender places where blowback kissed you, surprised at how small the pain is now that the fear is gone. The gauge holds steady as a promise you're willing to believe for 1 watch at a time. A laugh travels the length of the gratings and breaks softly. You rub a thumb across the hinge you offended earlier, and it comes away clean enough to pass for forgiveness. Land arrives first as a change in sound. Bells come fewer and further apart. The telegraph points to patience, not hunger. You begin to bank the fires with the tenderness of ending a quarrel without apology. Thin even covers, edges roused once more, hearts let down to a respectable glow. Ash pit doors open for the last clean-out, rakes finding stubborn corners your pride refuses to abandon. The hoist thumps and the trunk exhales cinders into a sky that finally looks like a place you might breathe. From the ventilator mouths a cooler draft arrives, edged with harbour smells and a rumour of rain. You police the floor with a wetted broom so dust can't make new work for lungs already hired full-time. Hand tools line up in their rack like men at muster, scuffed and honest. The chief's boots cross behind you. He says nothing, which counts as praise. You close each door with a palm as light as gratitude, and feel the ship ease under your soles the way a horse eases when it sees the stable roof. You take a minute at the combing that belongs to no watch and almost to no ship. The deck smells of rope, wet wood, and a city's morning, yeast and tar, coffee and stone. Men already walk with shore legs, as if ground had forgiven them in advance. You taste coffee more than iron for the first time in days. Pilot aboard, bells easy, the engine polite, humming out arrival instead of ambition. You touch the singed edge of an eyebrow and decide it suits you, a receipt you paid and kept. Ladders feel shorter when they point up. The sky shows a blue bright enough to look illegal after so much orange. You wipe your hands on a rag that had a colour once, and choose to believe it did you a kindness. Dock voices drift down the trunking, trading hoarse jokes with the fan's steady hymn. Somewhere a gull laughs the way gulls do, rude, relieved, already thinking about the next meal. You breathe once for yourself and once for the ship and head back down to bank the last bed. Payday smells like ink and damp paper, a different stink that somehow feels clean. You stand in a queue that shuffles like a coal heap finding rest. Cap in hand. Name called by a purser who has never tasted the stokehold, except through rumours on a payroll line. Wages arrive folded twice, the corners soft from too many pockets. You open them with fingers that still remember the shovel's hot bite. Arithmetic happens before pride can interrupt. Allotment set aside for a name that matters, a room with curtains, a mouth that waits on a different shore. A few coins stay to sweeten present tense. Soap postage 1 pint that will taste like forgiveness. You sign a book that will outlive your lungs and tuck the paper where sweat can't find it. Around you the men count in varieties of love. A sister's dowry, a mother's medicine, boots for a child whose feet keep racing the heel. The ship quivers against the quay like a dog straining at a lead, but for one long breath she belongs to the men whose heat pushed her here. Pay ends when the notes vanish. The ache of earned hissing stays and keeps you upright. A locker becomes a ledger you can touch. You trade the neckerchief that learned to be black for one that pretends red for an hour. Buy socks thick enough to argue with steel. Choose a salve whose label swears by miracles and grease. A man sells you a comb with half its teeth and more confidence than sense. You buy it anyway because hope is a cheap luxury that sometimes works. The boots you want are dear and the boots you need are available. You pick need, and the leather creaks like a promise you will make it through another gale. You knot a short length of line onto the shovel's shaft to save your wrists. Stitch a tear where the flannel surrendered. Rub oil into the cuffs so the next watch will brush off easier. Small repairs talk louder than speeches. Tools answer kindness with hours. In the mirror of a polished valve, you catch a stranger whose eyes look calmer than yesterday's. You tip him a nod and he nods back, and between the two of you a truce is signed. In a corner where voices drop, talk folds itself around words that sneak. Union, committee, vote. The chief's door stays shut and everyone pretends shut doors can't hear. Men with careful faces describe pennies becoming leverage, hours becoming schedules that don't break bones by design. Then the rumour that has followed you since last port paces in. Oil firing, fewer men, a clean that comes from valves and not from rags, a flame you start with a wheel instead of a match. The word modern sounds kind in a way that worries you. Someone says progress, someone else says ghosts, meaning all the hands a ship won't need. You imagine the gratings without the chorus of boots, the stokehold speaking in a quieter grammar. Pride bristles. Hunger thinks it over. The sea won't notice, you decide. She never counts how many backs bent to pay her toll, only whether the gauge held and the bell came on time. A leaflet changes hands, creased and thumb black, promising a meeting over a chandlery. You pocket the rumour like a nail you may need later. Pride stands beside cost the way two brothers lean at a rail, close enough to touch, too stubborn to admit it. The job has carved you into something you can recognise by hand alone. Forearms tough as rope, lungs that count stairs by memory, a back that knows weather before officers do. Yet every cough taxes you in coins you cannot spend twice. You weigh the old romance of sweat against the arithmetic of years. How many watches until breath becomes a smaller animal? How many crossings until the world narrows to corridor, ladder, bunk? A man mentions a berth on a steamer that burns oil and needs fewer of your kind. Another says a yard ashore wants a boilermaker with hands like yours, The sea tugs the string tied to your ribs and you feel the knot hold. You choose to keep choosing for now. The paper in your pocket means boots at home will last winter. The gauge on the bulkhead means the ship will too. Between those two needles you walk as steady as a man can. You bank the mind the way you bank a fire. Edges first, heart last. Up the ladder, the morning air shocks your teeth with a sweetness you'd forgotten existed. You step to the rail and let wind comb what hair the watch left you. And for a moment the ship is a dark street travelling under a taller sky. You think about unnamed labour moving continents, letters riding dry in bags because you kept steam honest, migrants staring at dawn from decks you heated with your lungs, barrels and bundles arriving on time because your seconds were counted true. You find gratitude where you didn't plant it, in clean water that does not taste like metal, in a cup that cools instead of burns, in a bed that will not sweat back. You think of glass that turns a tap into a river, of air that doesn't ask a price, of light that comes without heat's demand. You hold those luxuries like new tools, turn them in your hands, promise your knees a day with no ladders, and swear not to forget how they were paid for. You revisit the first step you took into heat and find it waiting, generous as any hardship that believes it owns you. You fed a furnace that never fills, and for a while it fed you too. Coins, stories, a way to be necessary that never asked for applause. Tonight, you do not have to feed it. You let that sentence sit on your tongue until the iron taste thins to memory. You tell the quiet that if it kept you company, it can have a score. The smell was a 9, a 10 on rough nights, a blessed 3 when rain found its way down the trunks. You whisper where you're watching from, this rail, this harbour, this hour, and invite any stranger who hears to answer back. Tell me your harbour, your town, your pillow, pin and number on the stink and a name on the sky. Sleep waits like banked coals that will hold you warm without asking for more. You turn from the rail, carry the cool with you, and go looking for the dark that belongs to rest. Sleep well, watch relieved. You climb until the heat lives under your boots instead of inside your shirt, until breath stops needing negotiation. The last ladder empties you into air that wasn't pre-owned by fire, a wind that combs your hair and leaves your eyes wet for a better reason. You stand at the rail and feel the ship's ribs ease, the way a horse slackens when the bit comes out. Harbour makes its own weather. Coffee and rope tar, yeast and diesel, a gull's rude laugh stitched between voices. The ventilators push one last warm sigh up your throat and then fall quiet. Like dogs settling after a bark they don't regret. You keep your hands on steel because the steel is honest even when it burns. The deck under your soles no longer hums for speed, it hums for stopping. Somewhere below, the beds glow like banked memories instead of demands with teeth. You let that difference soak in, the way cold soaks a rag, until your shoulders remember they're allowed to be bones and not merely hinges. Think of what moved because you did. Letters crossed oceans warm and dry because your seconds stayed true. Canvas bags rode above a heart you fed with coal, and names found other names on time. Cargo of stubborn barrels didn't sour because your wings burned even when the wind argued. A crate of shoes met a pair of small feet that had outgrown hope last winter. Families leaned on the rail before dawn and believed land would still be there at noon, because the gauge didn't lie while you were looking. Newspapers stepped off gangways carrying stories that outran the ships that brought them. A letter from a son made it into a mother's pocket like a coin, and she unfolded it precisely because you kept the telegraph from begging. A city woke to goods a continent forgot to make. None of those people will ever know heat tasted like iron and knives where their good fortune was minted. You do. You hold that quiet truth without bitterness, like a tool you clean and return to the rack. Count your luxuries the way you once counted door seconds. Turn a tap and see a river answer without scale in it. Twist a knob and ask a room for warmth without paying first in lung and skin. Flick a switch and receive daylight trained through a filament instead of through a furnace mouth. A shirt that dries by itself, boots that cool, a pillow that doesn't remember a stranger. Windows that open to air that doesn't charge interest. A kettle that sings without shouting. Soap that is for skin instead of tubes. A bed where your breath goes out and comes back gentle, like a tide that knows the shoreline by name. Water that tastes like nowhere except home. Coffee that arrives without a journey through soot. A silence that doesn't feel like a trick. The small miracle of clean, under your nails, behind your ears, across your teeth, paid for by work that doesn't set your eyebrows at risk. You inventory these things without drama, the way an engineer checks for tools on peg and cloth hung dry. Say again the line that started this shift and let it mean less tonight. You feed a furnace that never fills. True, the sentences about the sea are true. Honest at noon, different by dusk. But right now, you don't have to. The bed below is a red memory and not a master. The pointer sleeps in the sweet place and can nap without apology. Take that undeserved peace and call it wages, the part of pay you never sign for. If this kept you company, if the heat and iron and routine turned into a weather you could fall asleep inside, leave your mark the easy way. Give the smell a score out of 10, tell me the harbour across your window, the city, the small town, the somewhere between. Pin a name on the sky you're watching. That's the only roll call we keep when doors are shut and tools are stowed. Where you are, how the air tastes, whether the noise quieted enough for your eyelids to choose you. Now bank the mind like a fire you respect. Feed the edges, lay the last thin charges where worry lives, and let the heart settle to a steady glow. Close the doors softly inside your ribs. Let the draft fall quiet. Let the fans that live in your head spin down to a purr and then to a hush. Count breaths like door seconds. 1 and 2, 2, and 2 and 3. And imagine the hinge shutting clean each time. Picture the gauge glass with water on its mid. The 2 cocks clear, the blowdown done. See the telegraph pointer resting where patience lives. Hear the engine's thrum flatten into a lullaby that fits under a pillow. Smell nothing sharper than soap and the cool metal scent of night. Hands unclench without being told. Shoulders level themselves, jaw forgets the taste of grit. Give the embers one last look and decide together you've done enough. That decision is the softest luxury of all. Sleep is relief without witnesses. Climb down from the rail inside your thoughts and lie full length in a bunk that doesn't remember anyone but you. Turn the ship into a quiet street drifting under a taller, kinder dark. If the sea comes to mind, let her walk past like weather you've already handled. If flame flickers behind your eyelids, let it be a hearth, not a mouth. If a bell rings in some other life, let it be for someone else's watch. You've earned a night where the furnace is simply a word, the shovel simply a shape. Tomorrow belongs to schedules and bells, to harbour tugs nosing at the bow, to paperwork that smells like ink and damp paper again. Tonight belongs to lungs that take air without bargaining, to skin that accepts cool without flinching, to wrists that don't have to prove they're steady. Write your last line by doing nothing. Close your eyes. The ship will keep floating whether you watch or not. The fire is banked. The mind is too. Sleep well. Watch relieved. Morning will come anyway, and with it the fussy miracles you promised yourself. You will twist a tap and watch water run bright and indifferent to boilers, and you will forgive it for being easy. You will button a shirt that smells like nothing, lace boots that do not hum with deck heat, and walk a street where the only rhythm is your own. If the mind tries to turn hinges into throats again, you will give it softer doors, a bakery's bell, a gate you close with a thumb. In shop windows, brass will sit content without gauges to tame it. A clock will tick in embarrassment at how gently it orders people. You will lift a mug and feel its heat behave, civil, modest, domesticated, and you will grin at how small a flame can be when it isn't hungry for miles. Your hands will still measure weights before your eyes do, and you will still stand with your feet set as if the ground could pitch. Then you'll relax and let your stance belong to sidewalks. You will take a long breath that owes nobody anything and think, banked, not out. Later, when sky climbs to noon and back down the rungs to dusk, you will measure hours without bells. You will notice the absence the way a tongue notices a missing tooth, puzzling the gap until habit gives up. The telegraph that once lived behind your eyes will hang its pointer, thread slack, polite at last. You'll find yourself counting anyway, 1 and 2 and 3, adding sugar to tea, turning a key, tying a knot for groceries on a bicycle rack. The world keeps giving you levers and wheels. You keep answering with small accurate motions because you prefer objects that obey. You will miscount on purpose once, just to prove you no longer owe accuracy to brass. Then, out of habit, you will fix it, smile, and wipe the teaspoon as if it were a slice bar catching light. A cat will braid your ankles on a stoop. A neighbour will call your name without shouting over machinery. The silence will learn your face, and finding nothing to push will sit beside you like a friend. You will let it stay. You will catch sight of a funnel at the river bend. New paint, proud name, smoke that makes its own sky, and wonder who is counting seconds under that glory. You will not envy them, and you will not pity them. You will recognise them the way two lamplighters recognise the same dusk. Work can be grief and it can be meaning. Down in that ship, men will lean their weight into minutes and ask nothing public in return. You will wish them a steady draft and an honest glass, because blessings suit mechanics too. You will know the gait of the engineer by how the deck listens, know the temper of the fire by the colour on a man's cheek, know the watch's mood by whether jokes land or pass like sparks that didn't catch. You will tilt your head and hear the engine's breath stitched into water, a steady syllable you once recited in heat. Then you will turn away, not because you have forgotten, but because the day has asked you to remember kinder things, and you are willing. Nights will keep a few old tricks, a dream will try the door with a red light behind it. You will answer by banking it. Thin even throws, edges first, heart last. Another dream will bring the bunker's whispering slide and the soft rush that followed the plank, and your hands will wake already on the rope. You will laugh in the dark and say there are worse teachers than fear and better lessons than pride. If the dream is weather, you will set your knees to the roll and ride it until the bell in your head admits morning. If it brings the leak's white feather, you will set a clamp across memory and walk the spanner slow until the hiss goes kind. If it brings the long quiet, you will breathe with it and let the engine in your chest idle sweet. You will keep the short prayer that begins with draft and ends with door, and it will still work, even on thoughts. When you wake, the room will be ordinary and generous, a window, a mug, a floor that does not tilt. You will thank it anyway. There will be talk of oil again, then electricity, then engines that sip fire instead of eating it. Ships will ask for fewer hands and reward different crafts. A boy who might have learned to read flame will learn to read dials, and later a different boy will read numbers no gauge could hold. None of that erases names carved into bunker beams or jokes welded into benches with burned coffee. You will keep saying we when you mean the men who work the heat, because belonging survives even after the room is retired. The language will change, but the grammar remains. Patience, order, respect for heat. Museums will clean the wrenches you once wiped on your flannel. Children will press noses to glass and ask why anyone would shovel fire by hand, and you will say because someone had to and because someone could. You will add that the cost was paid in lungs and time, and that the receipt was a ship arriving when promised. You will not name heroes. You will name crews. In the very end of the watch you call a life, someone will ask what the work was for. You could stack reasons like scuttles, wages, pride, motion, bread, a letter that arrived dry, but the answer that feels most honest will be simpler. You kept time, you turned seconds into distance and heat into arrival. You took a machine that wanted more, and taught it to want exactly enough. You were one of many, and together you were the hand that reached across a cold width and pulled two harbours closer. If you must give it a monument, let it be a well-kept gauge glass and a hinge that closes without complaint. Let it be a night where nobody rings you and a morning where coffee tastes like nothing burned. Let it be this, a breath taken without bargaining. Then, if there is an audience, invite them to count with you once more, 1 and 2 and 3, and close the door softly on the glow you tended. Call that closure and rest. The world will not notice, and that is fine. Ships seldom clap for the tide. A quiet room will, and you will hear it. You walk the quay with the ship dozing against the wall, a great animal dreaming in ropes. Market carts clatter past, hoop iron on barrels ringing like small bells, and you fall into the rhythm of land without trusting it yet. Your hands stay half-curled for a shovel that isn't there. Your shadow still squares its shoulders at invisible doors. A chandler hangs lamp glass in his window, like captured moons. A boy fogs one with his breath and writes his name as if claiming the tide. You buy postage, fold a letter small enough to travel in a coat, and stare at the ink until it stops smelling like work. A pawnbroker's sign creaks. Bootmakers set out leather that glows brown as syrup. You try on a pair and listen to the soul talk to the boards, deciding whether the voice will suit ladders. A girl sells matches by the dozen and asks if ships eat smoke. You tell her yes, and that yours is sleeping off a feast. When you turn back, the funnel cuts its black triangle against a sky rinsed pale, and you feel the quiet pull of a bell that hasn't rung yet. Habit tugs you back aboard before sunlight learns your name too well. Below, the stokehold smells domestic for once, wet slate, cooling brick, A kitchen after guests have gone. You check the beds the way a farmer checks a field after rain, palm hovering to feel where glow still argues. The shovel leans where you left it, blade clean. A Cooper's curve dulled by oily lamps. You oil hinges, because quiet should be maintained like pressure, and you draw the slice bar across the grate as if sanding the memory of haste. A nail on the bench keeps talismans, a bent washer, the rat's spoon, a button that still believes it's brass. You square the scuttles, lash the ash bucket handles with new line, and write a note on the slate about the port-outer's touchiness. In your pocket rides a matchbox with 3 sticks and a promise never to need them until paid to. On the way up you count steps, not because you must, but because counting steadies men who have spent hours bargaining with flame. At the combing you breathe, and decide the next coins will buy socks, salve, and a pen with a nib that doesn't scratch. Afternoon drifts into the ship like smoke through louvers, slow and certain. A fiddler finds a corner near the galley and saws out a tune that remembers land better than you do. Someone keeps time on a coal scuttle with 2 spoonbacks, bright as coins. Trimmers swap stories about ports that never were and women who might have been. You don't correct details because exaggeration is how tired men draw maps that include hope. Jeffers produces the rat's old spoon and mounts it on a sliver of board with 2 copper tacks, a saint's relic and a chapel of grease. He declares that any man who touches it before a watch will come back with eyebrows. Nobody volunteers to test the limits of faith. The cook sends cake ends. The bakery would disdain, and the crew treats them like treasure anyway, sugar feeling like mercy on the tongue. For a while the engine's silence isn't absence but room, and conversation moves in as if rent were cheap. A voice tries a sea ballad and loses the key. No one minds. Some days the ship is only work. Today for 10 minutes. She is also home. Toward evening, mist complicates the harbour. Foghorns talk to one another like old men on opposite porches, patient and a little deaf. You lift your head and taste wet rope in the air, tar softening, the malt of some brewery's happy schedule drifting between sheds. The pilot boat scuds by and throws a curtsy. Tugs prowl with their noses down, ready to fetch whoever forgets which way the tide is running. Lamps wake early on the pier and pull coin-coloured light across rain-dark planks. Gulls refuse to be impressed. Harbour water breathes under the hull with a slow, heavy patience that feels like forgiveness earned. You take a letter to the box by the gate and say the addressee's name under your breath the way some men cross themselves. On the walk back you let your pace match the cranes, swing, pause, set, and discover your knees can move without bracing for a roll. A watchman salutes with 2 fingers and a grin. You return it, take the long way round a puddle just to hear your boots argue gently with the boards, and let your shoulders forget commander a minute. Night ashore means bed ashore, and the mattress greets you so soft your knees distrust it. Sheets cool like creek stones, the smell is soap with a memory of sun. A window grudges a square of sky, and you stage manage the room the way you stage a watch. Boots aligned for the midnight stumble, cup placed where thirst will find it, jacket folded to pretend it isn't working tomorrow. You bank the mind with practiced moves, edges first, heart last, and let the noise sink to ember. A tram clacks somewhere, a whistle answers, and then the city remembers how to sleep without engines teaching it a beat. You hold still long enough to hear your own blood without iron in it. For once the sea doesn't pick the lock on your thoughts. It stands outside like weather observed through glass. You fall in stages, each shorter than the last. Door, hinge, hush. When sleep arrives, it has clean hands and no demands, and you let it turn down the lamp inside your skull until the room and your breathing agree on quiet. Morning again, but a different kind. Sun climbs a drain pipe outside and spills into your room with no supervisor. You wash until the water stops remembering coal, shave until your face belongs only to you, and eat a breakfast that doesn't argue. Bread that snaps, butter that yields, coffee that warms without commanding. On the way to the dock you carry a parcel wrapped in brown paper, a new neckerchief, socks that promise to outlast a storm, and a pen you will use to write a letter that says more than I am fine. You pause at the railing above the slip and rehearse the quiet you intend to keep when heat asks you questions again. The funnel cuts the sky like a lesson you already learned. You touch the scab where blowback spoke and decide it can keep the last word. By the time your boots find the gangway, you're ready to step back into the work without letting it take everything. That resolve is small as a coin. You spend it carefully and feel it buy you one clear breath. Muster comes with the pilot's knock and the chief's boots crossing the gratings like punctuation, and you step back into the room that teaches obedience by temperature. The beds glow banked and ready. You dress them with thin charges the way a careful hand quilts a child. Edges first, heart last, until the surface takes a steady breath. Gauges blink sober numbers. The glass sits honest mid after a cautious blow-through, and the injectors answer with the hiss you'd lend a teapot if it had nerves. Trimmers stage their scuttles by the combings. Wheelbarrows lined like patient dogs. Ash gear stands ready. Buckets wetted. Hoist poles clicking once to prove they remember. Dampers lift and settle without complaint. Air registers open a finger to even the pull. The second sketches the tempo with 2 fingers and a chin. Your door, your turn, your pace. You test the hinges with a knuckle, oil the one that sulks, and chalk a small cross on the slice bar where your hand prefers to land. A clock somewhere clears its throat. You roll your shoulders, set your boots, smear grease at the nostrils, and nod to the bed as if greeting a temperamental horse. The telegraph swings to half ahead, and the ship believes you. Heat rises like a choir catching the key. The draft puts both hands on your sleeves and tugs with purpose. You work your doors in a pattern. Your bones learned better than words. Open, throw to the wings, trim the heart shut. 1 and 2 and 3, step shift, open, feather, shut. Pressure lifts through a slow, sweet arc toward the number. The second calls her stride. Fans find their hymn. Ventilators throw the sea's cold into a furnace mouth that treats it like spice. Between throws, you brush the ash pits with a listening rake and feel for the small rattle that predicts a choke. Hinges breathe hot across your forearms. The shovel blade quarrels with the draft on the in-stroke and returns unburdened on the out. You count precisely because waste becomes smoke and smoke becomes scorn. The gauge glass gets another quick test, top cock, bottom cock, blow through, restore. You lean a forearm on the slice bar and let the look readers measuring, not resting. And the bed answers with a steady working breath. Bunkers are a country with their own law, and the men inside them obey it by listening hard. You keep an ear for the scuttle's music, barrow thuds, shovel talk, the hush that means the slope is thinking. Then you adjust your throws so the chain above doesn't starve the chain below. A lantern's smear finds rats rehearsing boldness on a crossbeam. A timber shore groans like an old oath and holds. You know the trimmers by silhouette now, Jeffers with the barrel chest that pretends he never tires, Bantam whose speed spends itself perfectly and then refills, the new lad with a cough he hides in his sleeve. You make the bed even so their baskets land where air will use them. Once the coal whispers loose, a sack goes across the slide and a plank goes in like a tongue in a closing throat, and 3 men ride the heap from eager to sulking. No speeches, only breath and a return to rhythm. When a subtle bangs twice, you angle your next throws for the wing that sagged, and the stoke holds 2 economies, heat and effort, balance. Night leans in without complaint and the watch shrinks to the shape of your hands. Minutes become the small work that keeps a big thing decent. A hinge oiled, a grate shaken just enough, a slice under the bed to break a sulk before it hardens into pride. You count door seconds with the regularity of prayer and make your micro-rests look like checking. The other fireman sings half a verse of something about Galway and loses the tune. You pick up the beat with the ash rake because percussion forgives what melody forgets. The chief walks his quiet circuit and taps a needle the way doctors test a knee, listening for the reflex he paid for. You taste salt at your lip and find it isn't the sea. Between orders there is room for 1 swallow of water and 1 thought about nothing at all, which is the richest thought a stokehold allows. A cold smut lands on your tongue and proves you still belong. Then the bell says full, and you turn attention into heat again, door to door, second to second, without flourish. Soot day arrives on the schedule experience keeps under its hat. You bank 1 furnace, check for spitting tubes and open the soot blow valve with the respect granted any mouth that answers in heat. Steam lances the gas paths, black snow lifts and unhappens a few feet from your face, turning flame sharper where it had dulled. Where the lance can't reach, you thread the pricker and draw out feathery crusts that wanted to pretend to be armour. Blowdown follows like a cleansing thought. Open top, open bottom, watch the water write its honesty across the glass, then close and restore. If foam shows up with its lies, A measured pinch of treatment goes in the feed, and you listen for the engine to forgive you by steadying its breath. The chief eyes the gauge the way a banker eyes a ledger. The second likes the note the fans sing when tubes are clean. You wipe your mouth with your wrist and taste soot that insists on staying friendly. Clean is a direction, not a destination. But for an hour you walk toward it without losing ground. Outside the plates, the sea writes its long cursive. Inside you write your shorter, sharper hand, and together the lines make a passage. You steal a look-up trunk at a piece of sky no larger than a coal scuttle, and see a star that does not flicker, proof that something in the world refuses draft. You imagine the rail for one heartbeat, the cold bite of it, the smell of rope and wet paint, and then return to the grammar at hand. Fuel, air, water, time. The watch will end because all watches do. A bell will decide the minute and you will agree. Until then you keep seconds tame, feed edges first, and trust the bed to hold its temper, because you kept yours. The telegraph dozes, the pointer only nodding when a tug shoves the bow into a different lane of wind. You finish a circuit of the ash pits and come back to your hinge, just as habit wanted. Work answers with a breath, you answer with another, and the sentence continues true. Somewhere above, a gull complains to the funnel and gets no answer at all, which feels like proof the machine is content. Relief watches rotate and the room's grammar repeats, but familiarity doesn't blunt the edges, it only teaches you where they are. You share the great line with a man who hums hymns under his breath, and a man who has sworn off songs entirely. Both keep good seconds. Between throws you listen to stories shaped like tools. A father who measured his days in rivets, a sister who knits with wire because string feels weak, a son who thinks every engine is a tame dragon. You offer little and receive more, because conversation down here is a barter of breaths. You learn to be known by the fires you leave tidy, not the coal you throw. When rest comes, it is a lean against the slice bar that looks like measuring. When kindness comes, it is a mug of water warm as soup placed exactly where your hand will land. The bed in your care learns your handwriting. You begin to read its moods the way a farrier reads hooves, by sound, by heat, by how it carries weight without complaint. Mail comes aboard in a sack that looks like any other, but it is the only cargo the engine respects. In a corner by the pump, you open a letter written in a careful hand that makes the paper look tidier than the world. There is news that isn't urgent, and affection that is, a roof mended with tar and patience, peas that finally climbed the string, a neighbour who fixed his gate by listening to it first. A pressed sprig falls out, lavender or something that remembers sun, and for one breath the stokehold smells like a room with curtains. You tuck the sprig above a bolt where steam can't bully it and read the last line twice because the pen paused there. You picture a kettle that hisses without shouting, a stove that warms without demanding coin from your lungs. The engine breathes behind your shoulder, and for once the rhythm feels like agreement, not command. You fold the paper small, then smaller, and slide it into the salve tin because comfort belongs where practicality lives. When you return to your door, the flame seems less like a mouth and more like a heart you can keep steady. Sometimes the engine sulks for reasons that refuse to pose for the logbook. The note shifts a quarter tone, the needle hunts without straying, a tremor crawls up through the plates to sit in your knees. You and the second conduct the ordinary rituals in a new order. Check oilers, watch glands, taste feed, listen to bearings with a rod against bone. Nothing confesses, you back the bed away from arrogance and invite air to speak honestly. The flame answers with a steadier tongue, but the sulk remains like weather behind a wall. You shorten door time by a heartbeat and stretch the pauses between by one. You move heat to the wings and let the heart remember humility. Little by little the note slides home and the deck forgets its worry. No entry will capture the shape of that unease, and yet the watch will remember it exactly, the way a scar remembers the night without naming the knife. You write only this, adjusted firing to even tone, and decide not to teach the log how to be afraid. You build small museums out of usefulness. A nail near your station keeps a ribbon of sandpaper for brightening the shovel's lip. Another holds a rag folded true, oiled just enough to trap soot and not spread it. A cork guards a spare washer, a twist of wire tames a hinge pin that thinks about travel. A bit of chalk marks a door seconds, and turns an idea into a number where fatigue can't argue. On a beam above the ash pit someone has carved a scale. 10 lines, a knuckle apart, used to measure how far a door dares open when weather bullies men into hurry. A loop of string keeps a cotton plug ready for the hiss you hope not to hear. None of it would interest a museum with labels. All of it saves a breath you might need later. Visitors would miss the exhibit entirely, and yet it is the only one that keeps time. Order is a superstition that works, and you practice it until chance grows bored of trying you most days. Down here, when fog thickens into consequence, the world narrows to brass and bone. Bells become language you pass with your shoulders. The telegraph's arrow lifts and falls like a hand steadying a nervous horse. Above, the whistle writes letters in the air that ships answer or ignore according to their character. Below, you feed edges first and kill the impulse to make a big fire for small visibility. Speed without sight is vanity, and vanity scalds. You taste damp charcoal into every breath and feel the fans pull with a stubborn steadiness that makes you grateful for human stubbornness. Coal arrives slower because legs learn caution. Dot time shortens by instinct. Seconds gain weight. In the lull between orders, you imagine lanterns moving through milk and thank the men who steer by horn alone. You picture the sea as a field with fences you cannot see, and you teach your fire to walk, not run. When the fog thins at last, the flame brightens as if it had eyes of its own, and the ship exhales along with you. There is a joke that men tell only when the ship is content. It is about a captain who thought steam lived in the gauge and spent an afternoon blowing down the needle to save coal. You have heard 6 versions and laughed at each, because laughter in a stokehold performs maintenance pride never admits. Humour oils insistence. It keeps the bed from becoming a tyrant in your mind, so you collect punchlines the way you collect washers, ready to spend them where friction grows. A trimmer drops a wheelbarrow handle on his boot and swears in 2 languages. You reply with a story about the man who greased his spectacles so soot would slide off and then forgot why the world looked kind. Groans count as applause. The chief walks by, face like an unreadable gauge, and lets a corner of his mouth admit the repair is working. The watch lifts. You return to your door lighter by an ounce, which is exactly the measure the hinge wanted. Pressure holds, the glass stays honest, and the ship seems willing to believe you will carry her across 1 more mile. The new lad arrives with hands too clean and eyes that keep looking up, as if air might be cheaper above the coamings. You hand him your old shovel, and watch the handle fit or refuse his palms. He wants to heap the heart because it glows prettiest. You teach him wings first, thin, throws that land like careful promises. Count with me, you say, and you keep time the way the bell used to. 1 and 2 and 3 shut, until his shoulders stop trying to prove something and start trying to last. You show him how the shovel's nose writes on coal without wasting letters. Door open a hand's width, body turned from the blow, face angled, to let draft slide past, not through. He flinches at his first lick of heat and pretends he didn't. You let the pretense stand because pride is cheaper than fear. By the 3rd circuit, the flame stops treating him like a stranger. He learns to hear dead corners the way city men hear trolley bells. When he forgets to test the glass, you make him prove it twice, and he nods, chastened and grateful in the same breath. Orders trickle, then jump. The telegraph lifts to stand by, then half ahead, then back again as a pilot threads you toward open water. You teach the lad to read bells with his shoulders, not his ears. When the arrow stands straight, he wants to hurry. You put a hand on his wrist and say, "Pace feeds bridges better than panic." The chief taps the gauge with that priestly patience he keeps for needles. The second sketches little cuts that mean edges first, then heart. You count door time under the noise, 1 and 2 and 3, and the bed answers like a chest that has found its cadence. A gust steals down the trunking and tries to pull your shovel through the hinge. The lad glances up and you shake your head. Eyes on brick, not sky. The pilot whistles somewhere above. Down here you answer with seconds and colour. When the pointer swings to full, you are already there. Fire's awake but not wild. Water honest mid, injectors humming like polite bees. The lad grins without asking permission. You let it stand because the ship has accepted him for now. And acceptance is rationed by watches. Midwatch brings the kind of trouble that wears work clothes. The ash hoist jams halfway up its trunk and hangs, heavy as a stalled thought. You hear the change in the poles, no click, only sulk, and feel every fireman's rhythm skid. Ash waits where ash shouldn't, threatening to ram the draft closed. You close your nearest door to quiet the bed, rake the pit into neat submission, and motion the lad to wet the buckets till dust learns manners. The second arrives with a spanner and a look that names nobody. He opens the inspection plate and finds a clinker chip wedged like a bad idea in the rack. 2 turns, 1 pry, a muttered advice to gravity, and the teeth seat again. The cage creeps, then climbs proper, sighing cinders into a sky you pretend exists. You listen for the pals to resume their sermon, and they do. Click by rescued click. The rhythm returns, first to one door, then the next, until the room remembers its song. Only then do you dress the bed again, thin throws that apologise for the pause. The lad learns that repairs end when the music does, not when the tool leaves. Heat takes its tithe without ceremony. Near the end of the hour, a trimmer folds at the scuttle, knees gone soft, breath turned papery. You and Jeffers catch him before he tests the deck with his face. Lay him on a sack by the ash pit, where the draught will kiss without biting, and tip water past his clenched teeth until stubbornness loosens. Someone fans with a hat, someone salts a palmer, and the man's eyes come back by the inches. He tries to stand, you pin his shoulder with 2 fingers and tell him the ship can spare his pride for 5 minutes. The lad watches and learns that help here speaks quietly as sim or not at all. You damp a burlap and set it across the trimmer's neck. Steam lifts from the cloth like a small ghost that means we get to keep him. When colour returns, you trade him out of the bunker for a spell at the scuttles, where air remembers how to move. He thanks nobody, because thanks would waste breath. He nods once, a receipt for services rendered by men who will need services too. By the next wheelbarrow the rhythm has him again. Knees mutter, forgive. When the worst of the heat drains into the plates and leaves only its fingerprints, the watch grows almost tender. You show the lad where micro-rests live, the hinge you touch as if measuring, the slice bar that holds a forearm without looking like it does, the way you let a breath finish before you answer the shovel's next ask. You show him how to read colour without romance, white asks, orange agrees, dull sulks, and how to hear the faint rattle that means the ash pits want attention before they learn to complain. From a pocket you produce a small locket and set it on the bench where Flame can see it without thinking it owns it. Lucky, the lad says, and you shrug because luck is memory practiced. He grins again, less a question now, more a membership card, and the room seems to welcome the extra heartbeat. At the end of the circuit you make him call the glass honest in words, not just a look, and he does, voice rough but steady. You say the only thing softer than coal down here is the way men look out for each other. He nods, needing no correction. Relief comes like a door closing softly instead of a fist. The next pair arrives with their own elbows and jokes. You brief them short, bed even, port outer a touch sulky, hoist mended, glass honest, and write the same on the slate so memory doesn't have to carry everything. The lad's grin fades into the sort of tired that admits he belongs. At the ladder he thanks you with a nod, because words would waste breath better spent on climbing. You climb after and feel heat settle below your knees, as if it chose to live there. On deck, air tastes like rope and a rumour of rain. The funnel throws a lazy exhale that means you did not fail anyone today. You rub a thumb across the singed edge of your brow and decide to keep the new shape. In the mess a mug waits, warm and honest. A crust breaks like good news. You sit, count the seconds out of the habit, then let them go, one by one, until the room contains only you, the bench, and a breath that belongs to no machine at all. You take the next watch like shaking hands with an old temper. The ship noses out under a sky that traded blue for pewter, and the telegraph points to a patience that still asks for sweat. The bed answers readily. You feed the edges as if smoothing blankets, then stitch a thin line across the heart where laziness collects. Coal arrives at a measured clatter. Trimmers pace themselves like men who learned the price of hurry. You oil the hinge that argued last time, and it opens with the politeness of something that remembers being difficult. Door time settles back under your tongue, 1 and 2 and 3, and the draught tugs your sleeves with hands, eager but workable. You check the glass, top and bottom, blow through on for once, restore, and let your shoulders drop the width of a breath. Ash pits answer with a dry rattle that means attention, not crisis. You throw thin to the wings, trim the centre, shut step, the shovel quarrels going in and returns lighter, as if the fire had learned manners. The engine listens, approves by deepening its note, and the deck under your boots resumes the talk you know. Do this, not more, not less. Trouble arrives small, the way bad news likes to. The feed pump's note drops half a tone and begins to limp, then catches, then limps again like a man remembering an old pain. You lift a finger and the second is already at your shoulder. His ear leans, his hand makes a small circle, which means hold the line while we look. The injector takes a sip on command, smooth as a careful thief stealing heat and returning it as water. But the ship can't live on borrowed time. You trim the bed calm, cut door seconds shorter, and give the wings kindness so steam doesn't flog the glass into lies. The pump's rod shows a weep at the gland. Packing wants a touch. You ease the feed, wrench in hand, and walk the nuts a quarter turn, patience instead of swagger. The leak slackens to a polite sweat. The note lifts into the right key, and the engine sighs through the floor. The second nods once and drifts on. You write nothing on the slate. Tightened pump gland, injector standing by. Then forget the fear and return to counting. 1 and 2 and 3 shut. The lullaby the fire believes. By midnight, the sea forgets to behave and remembers to be a profession. Roll returns like a teacher with the hard lesson. You open on the upswing, throw thin, and shut at the hinge before wind can put a hand through. The doors slap with opinions, you compromise, hold, then coax. A trimmer's lantern paints a jittery sun on bunker walls while he works with a plank wedged in his teeth, taming a slide that wants to flow. You throw to the wings and let the middle learn patience. Heat tries to climb your sleeves. You turn your face, keep your count, and trust the bed to believe you. The fans howl in their iron flowers. Trunks moan. The pointer hunts a few pounds low and asks for courtesy, not panic. You feed faster without feeding more. Edges first, then a stitch across the heart to sew the flame to the brick where it breathes clean. When a gust steals down the uptake and the door bucks, you heel it shut and let the next open wait 1 heartbeat longer. The ship cants, corrects, and cants again. You keep time for both of you, not pretty but true. In the lull that follows, you teach the lad a repair you hope he never needs. One grate bar has begun to sag in the middle. The slice bar proves it by singing dull where it should ring. You bank that door shallow, dress the bed to the wings, and let the heart cool enough to touch with tools. The clinker hook does neat work, wreaths of fused slag coming up in reluctant segments that clack into the pit like bad choices leaving. When the glow eases, you lever the bar with a wooden prop, feel the bend confess, and slide a thin shim at the bearer to take weakness out of the span. Not a cure, but a promise to last the voyage. The lad holds the lamp while you set the grate back gentle, and feed a first thin throw to wake the edges. The bar answers with a better note. The bed resumes even breath. You write a line on the slate, shimmied centre bar, port inner, and add a mark Stoker's red, mind the shake here. The lad nods as if he can hear the warning inside the words, which is how learning looks when pride keeps quiet. Dawn smears a grey ribbon at the edge of the trunk and the watch ends the way tight knots give. Sudden, then obvious. Relief boots sound different on the gratings, a lighter rhythm that belongs to men who haven't argued with wind all hour. You brief them short, pump content, bar shimmed, roll easing, glass honest mid, and throw in a joke about a hinge that finally learned manners. The lad passes the shovel like a relay baton, and looks surprised when his hand keeps wanting to close around air. Up the ladder the air tastes uncommonly kind, rope and damp paint and the linty smell of daylight. In the mess, a tin plate clacks onto a table that forgives you. Tea arrives the colour of decisions and you drink it like sense. Someone retells the ash hoist story with improvements. Someone else stirs sugar into a mug with a clinker hook and calls it efficient. Your shoulders inform you they would like to be bones again. You let them. The deck underfoot no longer hums for distance. It hums for stopping. You decide that for 1 hour you will do the same, and nobody can write you up for it. Later, Shaw grants you 2 thin hours and you spend them like a man who knows coins can vanish. A barbershop window fogs. Inside, scissors whisper a new outline for your face, while the chair remembers shoulders learning to drop. The barber finishes with a hot towel that smells like lime and steam without coal in it. You buy a tin of better grease, a needle for the flannel's future, and socks dense enough to argue with winter. The post office smells of varnish and quiet. You slide a letter under brass and watch it disappear toward a sable where a kettle hisses politely. On the walk back you pass a chandlery window filled with coils and bright hooks. Every object seems obedient, and the thought feels like mercy. A gust lifts harbour rain and pastes it across your cheek, cool as forgiveness. You rehearse the quiet you intend to keep when heat asks its questions again. Edges first, heart last. Prove the glass, mind the hinge. Respect the seconds. By the time your boots find the gangway, you've saved enough calm to spend slowly. The funnel writes a triangle on the sky and you answer with a nod. Ready. Cole changes character like a man who lies politely. The last of the good Welsh goes down in proper tongues that burn clean and hot. Then the new lot arrives, cheaper and ambitious, sparking at the margins, leaving ash that tries to be architecture. You feel it in the shovel first, heavier by a whisper, reluctant to fall true, and then in the flame, which sulks orange where you expect white. You adjust the grammar instead of cursing the alphabet. Thinner throws more often. Wings fed with a gentler hand, the heart stitched only after the edges believe you. Ash pits need quicker courtship, a rake that moves like patience instead of anger, and the hoist coughs more often, because the trunk would rather breathe than choke. Smoke thickens if you court pride. You starve pride and feed air, and the bed forgives. Clinker grows faster. You slice early, and refuse to let laziness turn to stone. By the end of the hour, the room has learned the new Cole's temperament the way a farrier learns a strange horse, by listening with the wrists and letting correction arrive before complaint. By change of watch, your palms know this seam story. Emergency arrives with no introduction, 3 sharp bells and a brutal jolt that is every ship's way of saying someone's mistake just found a witness. Crash, stop! You move before thought issues a permit. Doors shut, dampers eased, throws halted mid-breath. Steam wants to charge forward into the engine's sudden refusal. You give it exits that will not hurt anyone. Blow down in pulses, injectors open enough to sip the panic down. Pressure hunts for a place to live. You keep it between rails while the telegraph clacks backward like a scolded metronome. The chief's voice is level because yours must be. The second's hand draws small circles that mean hold, now feed again. Safety valves flirt with their seats and you refuse to make them do the whole dance. You smell hot oil and restraint instead of fear. Someone above yells something that becomes policy down here 10 seconds later. The pointer settles a hair shy of comfort, and when the next bell says slow ahead, you are already there. Fire's awake but not wild, water mid-glass. The bed even has the sentence rewritten without losing its meaning. Some dangers smell like stories before they become them. In the bunker a hot tang rises. Not flame, not smoke, but coal, thinking about both. Spontaneous, the old hands say, and nobody laughs. You test with the back of your hand at the hatch and see a faint breath that argues for caution. Air is a friend until it isn't. You choose enemies wisely. The second orders the plate dogged. Vents are trimmed to starving. A steam-smothering line hisses into the suspect pocket, the way reason whispers into crowds. You post a man with a lantern and a nose that has learned to separate tales from warnings. The heat's grammar changes, less greedy, more sullen, and after a patient hour the bunker sighs back toward ordinary. No speeches, a chalk mark on the hatch, a note on the slate, and a quiet rule you do not break. Never open a question like that wide. You listen at the sounding pipe twice more, hear no rush, and keep an eye through the watch in case pride decides to rehearse again. You return to the doors and spend gratitude in thin, careful throws. Sundays afloat do not arrive with bells, they sneak in as kindness. A hymn from the forecastle climbs the ventilator trunks and spreads thin over the stokehold like oil on water. You do not stop, you do not hurry either. The tune threads through door seconds and turns, counting into something gentler than arithmetic. After dinner, someone produces a pudding dense as thrift and calls it duff, and the lad gets the first slice because he still keeps both eyebrows. Jeffers nails the rat's spoon shrine higher on a beam and declares the watch protected by ridiculousness. The chief, passing, pretends not to notice and then leaves a cleaner mug on the bench without ceremony. For 10 minutes the room feels like a place men live in, not a place they survive. You wash your hands a second time just to watch water darken and clear. Then the bell asks for half a head and you answer out of habit, seconds braided neatly with the last of the tune, and the bed breathes as if it too had said amen. Drills take time you think you do not have and return it later disguised as survival. Boat stations rattle the deck with boots, and below you set the fires safe for neglect. Doors shut, dampers right, glass proven, injectors ready to nurse while hands are elsewhere. You climb to the muster with a stoker's legs that distrust ladders which point away from heat. The boats hang clean and oiled, fulls coiled like patience on a good day. Names are called, hands land on thwarts, plugs are checked, breakers loosened. The coxswain's voice draws a box around confusion and gives it corners to hold. Stores are tallied. Biscuits, water breaker, lamp and matches, signal kit folded away like certainty in a pocket. Oars are shipped and unshipped until the clatter sounds like sense, and gripes bite true without complaint. When the order dismisses you, the air tastes brighter for having imagined loss and postponed it. Back below, the beds still glow exactly where you left them, and you let the relief spend itself as neat throws that seem to say good practice, lads. Let us never meet the reason. At night, when confidence returns cautiously, you listen for the 3 hearts you serve. The high-pressure cylinder speaks in quick, clipped syllables, ambitious and a little vain. The intermediate answers in a steadier baritone. The low makes a patient bass that forgives more than the others admit. Together they write a chord through the plates that your bones can tune. You can feel the engine think when the bridge hesitates, steam throttled, valves shading their phrases, the rod's long punctuation turning commas into periods. The thrust-bearing murmurs like a big cat. Crossheads whisper along guides. The governor ticks its narrow metronome. You fire to keep the sentence grammatical, edges first, heart last, no flamboyant adjectives, only verbs that carry weight. When the pointer sleeps in the sweet place, you sleep a little inside your own eyes, working awake, resting true. If anyone asked what music is, you would point at steel you cannot see and say this and mean it. Even your boots learn the time. Soles tapping answers you never say aloud. You hum along and the flame keeps the key. Inspection days arrive without warning, and you meet them with the same politeness you save for valves. A bored man in a cap the colour of authority steps down the ladder with a notebook whose pages already assume you're doing something wrong. You wipe your hands, prove the glass with top and bottom cocks, then blow through slow enough for him to see caution and not showmanship. He sniffs at the doors, asks about tube ends weeping, squints at lagging seams as if they might confess. You open a furnace just a hand's width, feed to the wings, shut and count aloud. He writes one line that could mean either good or merely not guilty. Ash pit drawers slide clean. The hoist breathes cinders like a gentleman. Safety valves sit prim on their seats. He taps the gauge with the gentleness of a man on a borrowed horse, nods to the second, and asks who keeps the injector strainers honest. You hold up your stained fingers like affidavits. He leaves a chalk tick on a beam and a smell of paper. When his boots go, heat looks like yours again, and the room exhales into work. You cross paths with passengers only when luck arranges a window. A fiddly repair keeps a door propped, and a steward curious past training opens a glance-wide gap from the passage. For half a heartbeat a child's face hovers there, eyes bright as brass, hair haloed by a world with curtains, and watches the stokehold flare. You turn your shoulder to spare them the blow and count your seconds anyway, feeling the draft tug at your sleeve like a lesson. The door shuts, the gap seals, the vision goes back to a dining room where sugar behaves. Later, air on deck tastes of oranges and starch, and you realise someone above is deciding the ship's character by how the napkins fold. Nobody will mention the way your eyebrows learned arithmetic. You smile into your mug and let the thought pass. Work does not envy tables. Tables do not imagine doors. The ship needs both kinds of rooms. Your kind simply has hotter verbs. You think of heat as a language some rooms refuse to learn. Cold makes a different animal of the ship. Somewhere north the wind files itself to a wire and thrums it across the cowl heads. Every breath enters your mouth like a coin left too long in snow. Draft grows obedient but greedy. You shorten door time and trail the shovel with a little extra care so flame doesn't overreach. Men cough in a new key, and wool learns to stiffen with salt that was sweat until the air took it back as crystals. You rub oil into boot seams and the seams drink like proper sailors. The fans sound taller, their hymn charged with iron. You feed edges that glow like hoarfrost turned bright, and you keep the heart low enough to avoid a hasty, hungry tongue. Outside, the sky carves blue from stone. Inside, the bed purrs if you let it. By change of watch, your face stings clean and your teeth ache from air. You grease your nostrils before tea and bless the man who taught the trick. Coal turns skittish in frost, but patience still tames it. Time shifts under your boots as the captain chases longitude. Clocks slip 3 minutes today, 4 tomorrow, a quiet larceny paid back by noon sights and a mate's neat pencil. Down here, bells alter their arithmetic and your body disagrees before it obeys. You learn to steal microsleeps more honestly. 2 breaths on the slice bar, a blink that ends when the hinge clicks, a swallow at the ash pit with the rake already in your hand. The lad asks how you keep count when the world resets and you tell him the trick. Trust the flame's mood and the glass's truth more than any clock. Pressure that hunts means hurry. A bed that coughs means pride somewhere. A glare at the bridge means bells will soon apologise. He nods as if you've given him a spell. You call it paying attention and charge him 1 clean hinge. When the clocks give back the minutes they took, nobody thanks them. You only feel the ship settle and your bones agree. Laundry becomes engineering done to cloth. You boil socks in a tin pail lashed to a friendly valve, count minutes by opens and shuts, and skim the scum as if it were scale. Shirts get pre-oiled at the cuffs so soot will surrender. Neckerchiefs soak in water turned black enough to remember names. Someone strings a line where heat behaves and not where it bullies. Someone else pegs flannel in the slipstream of a ventilator that pretends to be wind. The messman complains until you mend his kettle handle with a rivet and an apology. After that he lets your socks steam like dumplings. Boots sit stuffed with waste to hold their courage. By lights out, the line sags with clean that will never truly be, and you count that as victory. Tomorrow the cuffs will blacken by the second rung, tonight they smell of soap. A rag twisted into a rope serves as a ringer, and you hang the crackling shirt like a small flag of progress. Toward another landfall, you feel the ship grow particular. Orders come trimmed finer. The telegraph speaks in gentler verbs. You bank fires without making them sulk, coaxing each bed toward memory rather than hunger. Ash pits are cleared like a ritual after a quarrel. Tools line up on the rack with their faces washed. You test the glass with deliberate devotion, then stroke the gauge with a glance that promises no surprises. The engine's note shortens, then softens. Valves whisper instead of declaim. You feed once more to the wings and write a last thin sentence across the heart. When the bell finally points to slow ahead, you are already there. Red kept ready but polite, water honest mid, doors closing on embers that glow like recollection. At the ladder you pause and listen to the bed's residual talk, a murmur like a radio left low in another room. Dock noise slides down the trunking. The room will keep its heat without you for a while. You let it. Lines take the strain and the ship answers with that hollow thump you feel in your teeth. The pier leans closer like a friend with advice. You bank the last bed's neat as folded shirts and walk the rake through the ash pits until stubborn corners confess. The hoist coughs its black weather into a sky that doesn't mind. Poles preaching their click and mercy sermon as the cage rises. Men move with the purposeful slowness of people who know how long a day can be. Hoses snake, scuttles stack. The trunking sighs cool a breath that smells of rope, rain, yeast, and a city waking. You chalk notes on the slate. Port inner content, pump gland easy, hinge oiled into manners, and square the gear. Slice bars racked, hooks hung, buckets rinsed and left wet so tomorrow's dust remembers how to behave. The chief's boots cross the gratings like a sentence that doesn't need verbs. He glances at the gauge, then at you, and the nod is enough. Heat no longer owns your bones, just rents space. You wipe your mouth with the inside of your wrist and taste metal giving way to coffee. Coaling here is a different religion. Not bags and baskets, but grabs swung from a donkey engine clacking on a barge. Iron jaws biting a noontide's worth in one lift. The grab drops, the hatch blooms black snow, and the air thickens to something you could spread with a knife. You and the trimmers rig screens, wet down the coamings, and set a hose to sketch faint rain into the storm so lungs don't buy more than their wage. The barge crew move like dockyard saints. Hook come your horse. Bite, tongue, lift. Faces lacquered into masks by dust and sweat. You trim the bunkers as the tide of coal sloshes in. Shores reset, slopes taught to hold, passages kept clear for tomorrow's wheelbarrows. Every so often the grab clanks an old rail or a stone into the hatch and the watch jeers good-naturedly at the mine that sold rocks with its promises. By the last load your eyelids crunch. You spit, the taste coming up like last voyage. and laugh because there's nothing else that works. You slip 2 streets off the dock for a list of small salvations. A barber's glass shows a face that looks hired, but not owned. The hot towel smells like civility, and the cut says somebody believed your skull with careful mapping. A cobbler leans on his awl and nods at your boots. He sells you tallow for seams and scents for free. A woman at a stall folds a neckerchief that has the courage to be read and says it will look well on a man who knows fire. You trade coins and call it armour. In a doorway, a sailor with the weather printed across his knuckles tells you the old windjammers and how silence used to mean skill, not absence of fans. You don't argue. You have learnt there's more than one way to make distance. In the post office, you press a stamp with a firm thumb and write a line about mornings that smell of rope and bread. The clerk's blotter takes your signature like a small oath. On the walk back, rain drills the harbour flat and you let it clean you without complaint. Departure tightens every joint in the ship until she feels newly built. The pilot steps aboard with a borrowed weather in his coat. The telegraph clears its throat and points to the hour that turns harbour into the channel, channel into sea. You light the beds again, as if waking a friend who forgives slow starts but not sloppiness. Edges first, a stitch across the heart, door time counted clean. Coaling has changed the bunker's personality. You plant planks deeper, teach slopes to sit, and make the lad repeat the rule about never trusting a whisper. Wind presses its ear to the cowl heads. The fans answer eagerly. The draft lays hands on your sleeves like a reunion. Pressure climbs through the sweet arc. The glass sits mid after a patient blow-through. Injectors chatter themselves content and then hush like servants who know their place. You check the pump gland you loved earlier, one small quarter turn for luck, and write nothing about it because competence should not need applause. The pilot's whistle pencils authority above. Below you write seconds into flame until both languages agree. Open water greets you with that old testy shake of the shoulders. Swell under the bow writes a longer curve into the engine's sentence. You answer with a tighter grammar. Shorter door time, thinner throws, wings fed to keep the middle from arrogance. The new coal asks to smoke and you say no in 6 quiet ways. Air registers trimmed, ash pits courted, slice bar tip teaching channels where the bed should breathe. The lad tries a big throw and you tap his wrist. Never give weather a reason to laugh. He nods, recalculates, and the shovel learns humility again. In the bunkers, a plank wedges against a shore with a noise that means respect. Bantam rides the slope like a miner's spado and comes back grinning soot. The telegraph points to full and you're already there. Needle steady, glass honest. Valves singing a note you trust. The ship settles into her stride, that long, contained eagerness that feels like pride without boasting. You loosen your jaw and discover a smile stubborn enough to live in heat. Night writes its thin chalk marks on the trunk. Fog threatens but chooses another mile. Stars appear like nails in a blackboard, holding up weather that might otherwise fall. You take a slow lap, hands on gear you know as well as the names you don't say aloud. Shovel lip brightened with sandpaper, hinge that opens on manners now, pricker with a new bend at the working end, a cotton plug for the hiss you hope not to hear. You prove the glass again because truth is a habit, not a sight. The chief's circuit finds nothing to dislike, and that is praise. You lean your forearm on the slice bar and let the posture read as intention, not fatigue. Somewhere above, a late passenger laughs in a key that thinks air is free. You wish them more of it. The bed breathes like a big cat remembering it is tame tonight. You match your lungs to that rhythm, count 1 and 2 and 3, and shut a door on time as if closing a gentle thought. The watch looks shorter from here, which is the nicest lie heat ever tells. You hear the lie before you see it, an extra whisper under the fan's hymn, a hiss thin to wire. At the front tube plate right of the middle door, a pin-fine feather writes itself in a white across heat, a weeping tube. Nobody panics because panic is poor at tools. You ease the bed on that furnace down to manners, wings only, no heart, while the second sketches the drill in the air. Hold pressure steady, feed kindly, smother if asked. A trimmer dampens sacks and lays them where cinders might learn to fly. You test the glass again because fear breeds superstition, and this one is a useful god. Valves get their little turns that say attention without shouting. When the feather steadies instead of lengthening, the chief nods once. You fetch the plug box. tapered stoppers bright as coins, drift and hammer with handles long enough to keep your knuckles in tomorrow. The door opens only a hand's width. You angle your face, turn your shoulder, and count seconds into a calmer light. You speak to metal in taps, not speeches. The drift noses the leaky mouth. The plug takes the hint, then the bite. 2 firm persuaders, a third for emphasis, and the hiss retreats into sulk. The second's hand hovers at the damper, as if it were the pulse of a child. You shut, count, open the next door, and feed a thin apology to the wings so the boiler forgets pride. At the back plate, a man with longer arms and worse judgment would try the twin plug blind. You fetch the pricker instead and confirm a breath at the tail has eased to nothing. Good enough underway, the far end can wait for harbour, hands, and a temperature that doesn't eat names. You chalk a note on the beam, 1 tube stopped, starboard, outer row, and the lad writes it again on the slate in letters large enough for tired men. The chief touches the tube plate with the back of 2 fingers from a safe angle and grunts approval that sounds like a receipt. Losing a tube is like losing a tooth. You find new ways to chew. Heating surface down a whisper means cadence, not crisis. You trim door time shorter by a heartbeat, throw thinner and more often to keep the flame quick without swagger, and court the ash pits with diplomatic rakes so air can be richer than habit. The gauge hunts a hare until you prove to it that stubbornness is a fuel, then it settles at the number the second calls her stride. You listen harder for carryover because wet steam loves excuses, and you deny it in small, unglamorous ways. Steady feed, and no foam and no pride. The injector sings the right vowel and not the wrong one. You leave it there. The bed's colour vocabulary narrows. No more flattering white at the heart. More honest orange where real work lives. After 20 minutes, the room has learned the new grammar. The lad looks at the plug box as if it contains superstition. You let him. A little ritual keeps hands brave. You take a lap through the engine room because victory should be inspected, not assumed. The triple expansion stands there like a cathedral that learned to move. High pressure quick and clipped. Intermediate talking sense. Low drawing its big patient breath. Crossheads slide with the indifference of professionals. Eccentrics write their complicated cursive in oil. Sight feed cups tick out gold tears with a thrift you respect. The engineer's hand rests near the throttle in a way that says nothing and means readiness. He tips you a question without words. You answer with a small circle that means steady. Indicator cocks wink. A wisp escapes and is scolded shut. The governor minds its bees. The thrust-bearing murmurs like a cat too dignified to purr. You put your palm to the column and feel the argument between steel and distance settle toward agreement. On your way back past the gratings, you glance at the glass, honest mid, and allow yourself one breath that doesn't count seconds. Night drags a sleeve of velvet across the trunk mouths and pinholes it with stars. You crack a door for a look and see the flame behave, quick at the wings, disciplined at the bridge, no tongue lapping greedily where a tube used to be. In the uptake, a line of soot gleams like frost. Tomorrow will want the lance. Air arrives cooler, your lungs sign for it gratefully. Someone on deck throws a bucket, and you hear water hit steel. Then see. The sound falls down the ventilator like a promise that salt will always win in the end. You feed with the comfort of a list. Wings, heart stitch shut. Rake ash pits. Check the rattle, shut. Top cock, bottom cock, blow through, restore. The telegraph dozes, the pointer nods like a tired preacher. In the pause between doors, you rub a thumb across the plug box as if blessing coins. You're not superstitious. You're thorough. Down here, the 2 are cousins you invite to dinner when weather threatens manners. After the watch, the room shrinks to mugs and jokes that cost nothing. Jeffers swears he once saw a plug spit itself back across a furnace and land in a coal skirtle. Like a coin-finding church, you tell him lies need better boots than that. The lad asks if tubes dream of being pipes, and you find him a smile for mixing poetry into steel. Someone produces condensed milk and a spoon, and men become boys with a sweet tooth for 30 seconds. You write your note clean on the log, tube plugged, pressure maintained, feed steady, and put your name where blame would go if it had to. No one mentions luck because skill stands taller when not compared. You wipe your hands on waste that used to be a shirt and find your palms smell only of oil, not scorch. Up the ladder, the night tastes like rope and something green. You carry a small piece of quiet with you, as if it were contraband, and decide to spend it slowly, in breaths. Fog keeps its earlier promise and returns like a guest who knows the house. The whistle writes its patient alphabet, and you answer with seconds that refuse drama. Nets haunt these waters. The pilot mentions them with a shrug you can hear in the telegraph. An hour later, the deck shivers with a different reluctance. No shock, only a sulk that says something fibrous has opinions about the propeller. You hold pressure at the number the chief likes and make no sudden choices. The engine room trims its verbs. Valves shade. The governor minds the impertinence with a schoolmaster's frown. A boat goes over to talk to the problem with knives. Below, you keep flame honest and water mid. The bed wants to grow arrogant because it thinks the engine slights it. You teach it humility with thin throws and even ash pits. When the bell returns to half head, then full, it feels like forgiveness you earned by not requiring it. You allow yourself one breath that counts only as breath. Passengers sleep through the small rescue and will later credit the captain's steadiness with everything they did not feel. You do not mind. It is correct that they never learn the shapes of the tools you used. Instead, you count micro-rests and watch the lad learn to hear the telegraph's temper. Between bells, he asks about the rumour he keeps folding in his pocket. Oil. You tell him he'll know it when he smells it. That hot kettle, clean-wicked, uncold smell. And that it changes a stokehold from a mouth that eats to a throat that sips. Fewer men, different burns, new kinds of mistakes. He looks at the doors the way a boy looks at a field he may leave, and then back at the shovel, like a friend he's not ready to lose. You do not advise. Pride and rent argue inside a man without witnesses. You merely keep the fire grammatical so his thinking can be too. The fans choose that moment to make character. A bearing warms, the note darkens, and the draft's hand on your sleeves grows clumsy. You ease door time to suit air that's tardy, feed edges like a man courting someone older than himself, and signal the second with 2 fingers that mean we'll need the spare. He lifts his chin, a messenger sent, and the idle twin wakes with a start that rearranges your breath. Gratings feel taller when air grows stingy. Lungs write short sentences. The changeover is a short story told in bolts and belt and sweat, and then the hymn resumes in the right key. You smell insulation warming near the dud, and lay a damp sack across it like a grandmother's hand. The bed brightens its tone from argument to agreement. You lean on the slice bar as if measuring it, and behold, a new luxury. Oxygen arrives at a price you can pay. You do not say thank you aloud. Heat likes men who keep their manners private. In the bunker, a slope rehearses rebellion and fails because you planned for it. Planks, a sack, and Bantam's insulting whistle turn a slide into a sulk. Wheelbarrows resume their small pilgrimage, iron rims mumbling through their beads. A rat with scholarly whiskers inspects Jeffers' shrine and leaves unconverted. The lad learns 2 new truths in 1 minute. That coal will move when it decides, and that 3 men can edit its decision without complaint if they move like a sentence written together. You move heat to the wing where baskets land, so effort becomes flame before it becomes fatigue. The hoist coughs and clears. The trunk breathes cinders into weather that owns enough of its own grit not to mind. You find a rhythm that has room for a drink and make it look like checking a gauge. The chief's boots whisper past like a note in the margin. Good. After midnight, the ship remembers generosity. The stars creep back into the trunk mouth, and a wind with less salt and more distance combs the cowl heads. You prove the glass, not because it is likely to lie, but because lies prefer the moment you skip the ritual. Top cock, bottom cock, blow through, restore. Treatment gets a pinch to remind foam who pays the rent. You ease one damper, stubbornly refuse to feed pride with the middle, and keep the wings conversational. The flame answers in the colour you trust most. Not flattery white, not sulking dull, but that steady orange that means work is happening where it should. The injector hums the same vowel it did an hour ago, and you honour its steadiness by not fussing. The telegraph dozes, the pointer nods. You touch the plug box once the waymen touch a talisman, and then deny it with a shrug only you see. Thorough beats lucky, you tell yourself, and the room agrees. Relief arrives like a change in handwriting. New boots on grating, a fresh joke that has not yet lost its paint, and a nod exchanged between men who will never trade first names, but have swapped danger without receipts. You brief in the language stokers trust. Pump easy, fan number 2 sulked, but learned manners. one tube stopped on starboard outer, coal sparky but manageable, glass honest. The lad adds, quietly proud, that he kept time exact when the nets asked patience, and you let the men hear him say it because belonging is a wage. Up the ladder, night lays a cool hand on your jaw, and the deck smells of rope and a city that forgot to sleep. You sit with a mug whose heat is civil and count seconds on purpose to stop counting, then let them slip like coins you are finally allowed to spend. The sky looks legal again. The bed below no longer asks. Morning comes thin and metallic, a pale line poured down the ventilator trunks until it finds your eyelids and tells them the clock has opinions again. You move before you agree, boots remembering every rung, shoulders settling to their ledger. The beds wake when you feed the edges, 2 thin passes to the wings, a neat stitch across the heart. And the draft returns with both hands on your sleeves as if it missed you. The telegraph points to half ahead and you count door time inside your teeth, 1 and 2 and 3, closing on the number the ship trusts. Ashpits ask politely and you answer with a rake that sounds like rain. You prove the glass, top cock, bottom, blow through, until the level writes honest mid, then restore. Coal from the last hoist sparks at the margins and you starve the vanity out of it with thinner, truer throws. By the second circuit the engine's breath deepens, a note you can lean your back against. You check the pump gland you tightened last watch, and give it a love quarter more, enough to buy quiet without waking trouble, and hand the wings to the lad so humility can begin in the right place. Trouble arrives sideways, small as a teacup and twice as hot. A dribble at a line valve licks the second's wrist before his rag interposes. He swears once, quietly, and you're already reaching for the salve and the waste. Cotton first, cool second, grease third. Old doctrine written in scars. You test the fitting with the back of your hand from a distance pride can't shorten, find the leak is manners not malice, and dog the nut a prudent quarter turn. A damp sack goes over the sulking bit of lagging like a grandmother's hand while the gauge keeps its tone and the injector keeps its vowel. Down here, first aid is 3 things: grease, grit, and a friend who saw it happen, and you add a 4th. Proof, because guessing is how men lose skin twice. He cools the burn under the feed return, hisses at its civility, then laughs because the laugh proves ownership of pain. On the slate you write small: valve, weep corrected, salve applied. The bed never noticed your clinic, which is the only compliment that matters when work is done in time. Soot Day refuses to wait for a gentler calendar. You bank the starboard outer, test that no tube is spitting, then crack the lance and let steam-right knives through the flues. Black weather flies like winter under a roof. Flame sharpens from woolly to articulate, edges brightening where speech lives. Where the lance cannot reach, the pricker goes, hole by hole, patient as bookkeeping, drawing out feathery crusts that try to turn work into waste. Ash pits get their courtship next. Raked, wetted, bucketed, the hoist thumping its sermon up the trunk. When you restore the draft, the fans sing taller and the bed replies in clean grammar. The lad minds the damper like a librarian shushing exuberance, and you nod without looking. Tools get inventoried. Hook, slice, pricker, shovel, as if counting friends after a crowded room empties. Your wrist tastes last voyage when you wipe your mouth, and for 10 minutes clean feels like a place you can actually reach. You chalk the date on the beam because discipline prefers proof, then shut the door on a flame that seems newly fluent in your language. Afternoon brings shoreside errands disguised as mercy. 2 hours ashore buys letters that will leave smudges without turning fingers black. A cobbler's grin and a dab of tallow for seams, a bar of soap that swears it can outthink grease. On a corner a boy sells oranges cheap to men who smell of iron. You buy 2 and eat them both, surprised at how loud the colour tastes. Rain sniffs the harbour and decides to stay. You share an awning with a fisherman who promises the wind will veer by supper time, and that every promise is worth at least the talk. A street organ bargains with the squall and loses cheerfully. You buy 2 pencils because one will certainly go missing, and needles because flannel believes in planning. Back at the gangway, a dog sleeps through whistles, proof that some creatures earn the talent for ignoring hierarchy. You post a line that says only "I am all right" and mean it. Then you fold your errands away and bring your rinsed lungs back to the ship. Knight writes practical philosophy on steel. You think about the rumour of oil not as betrayal but as grammar changing. Verbs becoming valves, shovels becoming wheels, men becoming fewer and paid for different mistakes. Pride and rent negotiate in your ribs and reach a stalemate that looks like endurance. You look at the lad and measure what you are really teaching. Not throwing, but seconds. Not fire, but respect. Not obedience, but order that outlives heat. The engine's 3 voices, quick, sensible, patient. Braid into chord you can sleep inside later. You fire thin and true, feed edges that will remember you kindly, and let the heart purr without swagger. You prove the glass again because faith hates easy victories, then close the door on a count that feels like a prayer you've learned by doing. The lad asks what he should remember if machines change their appetites, and you answer without deciding you would. Respect, heat, distrust ease, and count anyway. He puts that in his pocket like a talisman, and pretends it weighs nothing. Above, someone drops a coil and the sound comes down the trunk like a bell you don't have to obey. You save the feeling for later. Landfall again, the kind made of syllables you cannot pronounce and roofs that pretend they were never wet. Bells ease, you bank the fires as if tucking children, edges first, hearts last, then take the rake through ash pits until the trunks breathe easy. Tools line up like witnesses with nothing to hide. Up top, cranes sketch alphabets you don't read and gulls cackle in the margins. You carry a letter to the box and fold a coin into a palm that claims to know a laundry less cruel to cuffs. The chief's nod is the same as always. Enough. You climb to the rail, let the sky's pale be your reward, and tell your lungs to spend the quiet slowly before the next bell remembers your name. Below, the beds glow like coals in a memory you will keep longer than any wage. A donkey engine coughs on the key and the sound tucks itself into your bones beside the fan's hymn and the telegraph's grammar. You tell yourself softly enough not to wake the next watch, that you fed a furnace that never fills and kept a ship on time, and that is enough for this breath. Sailing day turns into sailing life again, and yet something has loosened its grip. Maybe it was the hour in the oiled room of quiet blue, or the letter that smelled like a room with curtains, or the thought that heat has more than one alphabet. You take the watch with a steadier curiosity and find the flame answers in kind. Wings first, heart last, seconds counted true, the glass proven like faith. These remain, even if one day the shovel retires into memory. You teach the lad the part that outlasts tools. Order makes mercy. Attention is cheaper than regret. Pride should carry a rag. He listens as if counting beats and stores the sentences beside his pencils. By midnight, the engine writes the old sentence you have always loved, and you answer without ceremony. Work is still heat turned into distance, but your breath now keeps a small room for the life that happens when the door shuts. You step back from the hinge between opens and find you can see the ship without forgetting the man inside her. The ocean stands up one last time this voyage, just to see if you still remember the steps. You do. Open on the upswing, throw thin, shut before the gust. Feed edges while the middle sulks. Teach pride to wait its turn. A scuttle bangs once, Jeffers swears faithfully. Bantam slides a plank into a slope like a tongue into a closing throat. And the hoist preaches its click and mercy sermon up the trunk. The pointer hunts, then steadies. The glass winks honest mid, and the fans return to him after flirtation with howl. When the telegraph eases back, you feel the relief in your wrists first, then in the way your breath stops counting itself. You rub a tired circle on the hinge with waste and call the repair good. The lad says he could feel the ship forgive the wind. You tell him ships forgive nothing. They only keep records. He asks what to do when there are fewer doors to time. Teach the new machine seconds, you say, and teach yourself patience. He nods. Land appears as a change in sound before it dares the horizon. Bells stretch farther apart, valves shade their voices down to civility. The engine shortens its grammar for polite company. You bank fires as if folding away arguments for another day, leave red beds warm enough to remember you kindly, and rake the ash pits until the trunk breathes clean. Up ladder. The sky looks freshly laundered. Gulls practice sarcasm on the funnel. Cranes spell their steel alphabets across roofs. You turn in tools one by one, the way a man returns borrowed words, shovel, slice, pricker, hook, and this rack receives them like a ledger closing. The chief's nod contains nothing extra. Praise here is the absence of complaint. When the gangway talks about leaving, you listen without standing. For a minute you are a coal sack set where you can cool and still belong to the ship. Then the bell remembers someone else's name and the deck chooses to be ground. Pay again, but this time you buy time. You send more of it home than the purse expected and feel the arithmetic land where it should. Boots, a doctor's bottle, a window latch that finally obeys. You keep enough for food that bites like oranges and for a pen that writes without scratching. Outside the office, a poster advertises the clean miracle of oil with a picture of a man in white. You grin at the costume and do not sneer at the future. Back at the quay, a boy with coal on his eyelids sleeps across 2 sacks like a saint on a painted cloud. You adjust a tarp so rain will choose pity. Across the street, a marine store sells old wrenches polished by other men's hours. You pick one up and feel the handle remember hands. You put it down and keep your money because some souvenirs bite. Instead, you buy a small notebook and write 3 lines inside. Count, prove, respect. A man in the doorframe says oil will make saints or sinners of engineers. You answer that heat has always preferred confession to miracles. He laughs, and the sound fits the key. Night gives you the rail again, the cool bite of it, the old want to describe the smell even when no one asks. You think of the unnamed labour that moved continents while nobody clapped, letters that crossed dry in bags, cargo that arrived edible instead of theory, families who stepped ashore on time because the gauge did not lie while you watched it. You thank inventions that taste like luxuries now, clean water from a tap, a room that warms without a bargain, a bed that does not sweat back. You promise to remember the price man paid for each. Then you echo the first sentence you learned in this room and let it mean less tonight. You feed a furnace that never fills. True, and also quiet now. Tonight you don't have to. The bed below is a red memory and not a master. The pointer naps. The telegraph is bored. You breathe once for yourself and once for the ship, and allow both to be enough. Somewhere behind you a donkey engine coughs like a smoker and then clears its throat into usefulness again. If this kept you company, spend a little noise on me. Leave a smell score out of 10, and tell me where you're watching from. Harbour, city, famine, somewhere between. Name your sky. Then bank the mind the way you bank a fire. Edges first, heart last, and shut the door onto me like a hinge that obeys without argument. Let the fans that live behind your eyes spin down to a hush. Count 1 and 2 and 3 for no reason except the pleasure of a number that isn't work. Make a quiet inventory. Clean water, fresh air, a bed that doesn't answer back. And call it wages earned by people the world forgets on purpose. Sleep well. Watch relieved. Tomorrow, if heat asks questions again, you will have answers you trust. And if it doesn't, keep them anyway. They were bought honestly. Somewhere a bell will ring for someone else's watch. You are permitted not to hear it. Dawn arrives with the lightest hands, and the ship pretends she didn't spend the night negotiating with weather. You turn up early, not to work the doors, but to watch the lad hold them. He stands square, shoulder turned, face angled to the draft. His count is inside his teeth where it belongs. Wings first, then a stitch across the heart, shut, 1 and 2 and 3. Coal lands where air will use it. The bed breathes without sulking. You prove the glass once, for example, top cock, bottom, blow through, restore, and step back so ownership can settle on the right pair of wrists. The pointer finds her sweet place and decides to live there a while. When he glances for approval, you answer with the same nod the chief uses, spare and sufficient, because gratitude belongs to the job, not the teacher. Later you show him how to hear a rattle that isn't quite a choke, and how to make a micro-rest look like a measurement. By the end of the circuit, he has learned the hardest thing, to want nothing from the fire but obedience. Crew seasons change the way coal seams do. Jeff has signs for a berth ashore that smells of steam but keeps its heat behind glass. Bantam ships to a coastal tug where slides are shorter and wages steadier. Their boots ring a last time on your gratings, and then become someone else's measure. The shrine to the rat's spoon stays, nailed high and ridiculous, because every room that teaches danger lets one joke live rent-free. Tools answer roll call, shovel lip bright, slice bar oiled, hook squared, pricker true, a bit of chalk stubbed down to honesty. You scratch a date on the beam and write 2 names small, not memorials, just directions. Men drift and the ship pretends not to mind. She likes footsteps more than faces. When new lads come, you will tell them what Jeff has called the hoist, and why Bantam carried his plank like a sword. The slang will keep its edge after voices change. Rooms remember usage, steel remembers touch. You keep both kinds of memory polished, because that is how trade survives. Mail finds you between watches with a domestic courage that startles heat. The envelope smells faintly of soap in a cupboard where sunlight is stored. The handwriting keeps its letters close like neighbours. Inside, a window latch finely tamed with oil and a patient screwdriver. Bread that rose so proud the knife blushed. A child counting to 10 without skipping the hard numbers. There is talk of rain that made the garden grateful, and of a kettle that hisses without threatening anyone. A pressed leaf rides along, old toy, brown, green and careful, and for one breath the stokehold smells like a room with curtains and a clock that never scolds. You tuck the leaf above a bolt where steam cannot bully it, and slide the paper into the sow tin, because comfort and usefulness travel well together. When you open your next door, the flame looks less like a mouth and more like a heart you can keep steady. That is what letters do. They turn heat into something you can afford to hold. For minutes afterwards, even the shovel seems easier to lift. Ashore, the key lends you a new pair of eyes for an hour. You trade nods with a man from the oil-fired liner, and he grins at your soot and says his burners whisper like schoolchildren. You answer that your doors bite like terriers, but they heal when spoken to in numbers. He says filters sulk. You say pumps flirt with glands, and between you both the future puts its feet up on a bollard and listens. A chandlery window throws back your reflection holding neither shovel nor wheel, only a parcel of needles and a pen. You look survivable without the tools and are surprised to like the sight. A boy sells oranges loud as brass. You buy 2 and spend the colour slowly, segment by segment, until your mouth remembers another vocabulary. When you turn back, the funnel bites a triangle from the sky, and you feel the tug of a bell not yet rung. You nod to the oiler as if agreeing on weather, and carry your rinsed lungs down the gangway without apology. Night brings a quiet unsupervised by bells. In your hammock, the engine's cord slides under your ribs like a familiar tide, and you match your breathing to it without counting. You think about the grammar that will outlast you. Fuel, air, water, time, and the smaller rules that kept your eyebrows honest. You think about men who took pride like wages and paid rent with laughter, about how rooms that burn teach gentleness if you let them. The lad will keep time tomorrow. In a month he'll correct you once and pretend he didn't. A year from now he'll teach somebody else to keep the wings polite. You bank your mind as you bank a bed, edges first, heart last, and let the draft fall quiet. You thank the hinge that learned manners, the gauge that chose honesty, and the door that shuts when asked. Dream me an ocean that forgives lateness, and I'll dream you a hinge that never bites. The engine hums a lullaby with 3 voices, and in the space between them you decide to belong to sleep. If you are still here, if this kept you until the doors cooled on the page, spend a small kindness. Give the stink a number and the sky a name. Say where you are watching from so the room can imagine a different air, kitchen, porch bus, a quiet desk, the edge of sleep, a bunk that doesn't argue. This story wanted to be a corridor you could walk without tripping. It borrowed heat and returned it as minutes you did not have to spend alone. We kept the draft polite, the glass honest, the wings fed first, the heart stitched last. Tonight you don't have to feed the furnace that never fills. Let the embers hold you without asking for more. Count 1 and 2 and 3 for no reason except pleasure, then close the door softly and keep the quiet. Tell me your harbour, and I'll tell you mine. This one, this hour, this breath that finally belongs to itself. Rate the smell, name the sky, and then sleep like a banked coal, warm enough to keep, quiet enough to forget the clock entirely.